Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
Haunted house workers of Reddit. What is the worst thing you have witnessed? I worked at a haunted house, and I sold tickets. The ticket booth was literally right next to the entrance. We had one important rule when it came to selling tickets: no refunds. One night, a teen couple came and purchased 2 tickets. Before I take their money, I tell them that there are no refunds no matter what. They agree, and they purchase their tickets. They seem pretty frightened before they even walk in. Right in the beginning of the maze, we have a worker that scares you not even a minute after you enter. As soon as he jumped out, the girl ran right back out of the entrance. Her boyfriend ran out behind her. I was afraid I knew what they were going to say. They wanted a refund. Inside, I wanted to give them a refund. But sadly, I couldn't. Eventually, after about 20 minutes of just standing outside the entrance, the boyfriend convinced her to re-enter. Even though they ran out, I let them go back in. I heard them scream a lot, but they never ran out of the entrance. Sadly, I never got to see if they liked it or not because the entrance is far from the entrance. I'm only glad they didn't waste their money. I worked at a haunted house for 2 years. I'm on my phone, so here's a brief description of a few of my favorites. Dressed as a clown wielding a chainsaw in a white room splattered with blood and a strobe light. People would open a door into the room, and I would rev the chainsaw and give a high-pitched, manic laugh. One group opened the door, screamed, and ran backwards through the house. Eventually they ran to my room and finished. Dressed in all black, hiding in a hallway behind a laser light that basically blinded people and a fog machine. Standing against the wall, I jumped out in front of 2 girls who screamed and kicked me straight in the balls. Learning my lesson, I never jumped in front of people again. A few groups later, an older couple come through, and standing next to them I screamed. The woman proceeded to punch me in the face. Another, I was dressed in all black in a completely dark room, with a bunch of glows and the dark scream masks. We would hide off to the side, behind a railing, where no one could see us. As people would walk through the room, we would hold our faces literally 2 inches from theirs, and they had no idea we were there. Then we would whisper boo, or scream at them, or simply say hi in their ears, and they would freak. Every single time. It was glorious. My favorite. I was in a hallway with black walls painted everywhere with glow-in-the-dark dots. Yes, dots. I would wear all black painted in the same glow on the dark dots. They were bright. People could see pretty clearly, but I would stand in a corner behind a strobe light, motionless. No one ever noticed. Then as people came along, I would jump out as what I could only imagine as it is looking like the wall was alive. Well, I had this one group of girls come through, maybe 4 to 5 of them. They were walking up and I ran out of the corner to them. Screaming, they ran backwards into a wall and destroyed it. Completely caved in. I was the very first room in our house. I had to run through the house, find our manager and tell him I had broken a wall. They had to hold up the line for about 25 minutes while they fixed it. After about 10 minutes of no one walking through, the other workers walked up front to see what was going on. As I told them what happened, they laughed and congratulated me. After the night was over, all the other workers in the other houses, we had 3, asked what happened, why we stopped. I got to bask in glory as they all laughed and told me how awesome that was. I worked at the haunted house at the Playboy Mansion for a few years. It's a pretty big, haunted house. They take down the tennis courts and build it on top of it. The guests there are all wasted and usually missing pieces of their costumes, usually tops high 5. I was working in the drop portrait hallway where there's like 6 paintings on the walls and 4 of them pop down and there's a costumed actor behind them that jumps out and scares people. Anyway, this group of girls walk through, and we go to scare them. They screamed and ran forward down the hallway, which was pretty dark, and unfortunately for them had a sharp right turn at the end. So, these drunk girls go screaming and run full speed into the plywood wall and bounce off onto the ground. We could all see them from our hiding places and were laughing our asses off. Until we noticed this one girl didn't get up. She was on her back and moving, just not standing up. After a minute I opened my picture frame, stuck my head out and asked if she was okay. When I did that, I noticed what the problem was. She was wearing a super tight mini skirt and gigantic high heels, and because of those, and alcohol, she couldn't stand up on her own. She was like some kind of drunk turtle, helplessly flailing around on the floor. Which for some reason was hilarious to me. I shut my picture frame and laughed harder. Don't worry, her friends came back. There was also this secret door that I could use to sneak up behind people. I was dressed from head to toe in zombie makeup and I shambled up behind these 3 stunning South American girls. When I got really close behind them I did this zombie moan thing and they spun around and started full on shrieking with their hands on their faces and everything. But they didn't stop shrieking or start moving. They just stood there shrieking at me. Through like 3 full breaths of shrieking, pausing to breathe, then shrieking some more. I couldn't handle it. I was trying to be professional, but I started laughing and went back to my spot. I did the same thing to another group of girls later that night. There was some screaming, then I heard one say, "I'm peeing. I'm peeing." Awesome. That same night a guest punched one of the other actors. The thing about the Halloween party at the Playboy Mansion is that you get free drinks with the price of admission. Everyone. It makes it funnier for the people working there because drunk people are super entertaining. Especially when they start swimming in the grotto. There are a few more stories, but I feel like I'm rambling, so I'll end it here. I worked in a haunted house last year and had a wonderful time. I always really got into character. One night I was playing a creepy baby doll type of character, and since I'm a really small girl I fit the part really well. This group comes into my room, and I start walking toward them slowly while singing Ring Around the Rosies. I'm cocking my head and doing all this creepy stuff and the group is obviously scared like most people are. But then, this big black guy pops out and starts coming at me with his fist pulled back like he was going to punch me. Meanwhile, 4 feet 11 inches me is looking at him like he's the Grim Reaper. I backed up really fast and tried to press my room's panic button. Every room has one, but it was too high for me to reach. And this guy just kept coming at me. He was even swinging at this point. One of his friends grabbed the back of his collar and yanked him back to make him calm down and hurried him into the next room. I'm fairly sure they knew I was trying to get to the button, so they got out of there fast. It took me a while to find anyone to notify. I was new and barely knew the layout of the house, so they got away. I hope he doesn't wind up hitting someone else. I worked at a theme park haunt as security last year and moved around the park a lot. I saw some really funny/infuriating things. One, while working in our carnival area, where we had what were called sliders, they wore pads on the hands, elbows, and knees so that they could slide around on the ground and scare people. One of them slid up to a couple and the girl legitimately shrieked, jumped 3 feet in the air, and fell on her while her boyfriend laughed. Unfortunately, she'd bruised her tailbone and we had to call EMS, because she couldn't walk. The slider felt awful and her boyfriend even worse. But everyone was actually laughing, including the girl. They came back the next night, apparently bonus of season passes. 2, while working on our alien maze, I had a monster come running out of the maze looking for me or anyone wearing a security vest because someone had clotheslined another monster across the throat and was now refusing to leave the maze. We had to remove him. And the girl he clotheslined had to go to the hospital because he bruised her throat. She was fine by the next day. 3, possibly the worst and most infuriating. There was a dollhouse maze. This was where most of the underage girls worked, because it was easier to make them look like China dolls. I'm watching the line and a large rowdy group comes through shouting and banging on trash cans. They were obviously drunk, and I had to ask them repeatedly to calm down. When they got to the front, I called for someone to watch the line so I could follow them through the maze. They continued their behavior all the way through, until one of the rooms. This room was lined with mannequins and a few actors, who were particularly good at staying still. One of the men in the group decides to start grabbing the mannequins, and then he figured out that not all of the dolls are mannequins. He goes after one of the obviously living monsters. And flat out grabs her chest, full of honky action. This girl was 16. She flipped and kicked him in the nuts. We had to shut down the maze to flush everyone except her assailant out and then get the actual police involved. I was shocked that someone thought this was actually acceptable behavior. The man was arrested. His group was thrown out without refunds, obviously, and the girl's mother apparently pursued legal action against him, not the park, because she herself worked there as well in our hillbilly maze. Cute story, I had a little kid, about 6 or 7, ask me in the nicest way possible if I was one of the monsters because I have severe eczema. When I told him no, I just have bad skin, he told me that he hoped I got better because he thought I was pretty. A few years ago, I ran a haunted house at our local rec center. The gym was sort of the grand finale, and it was set up like a giant, indoor cemetery. A lot of families went through the haunt and the kids were horrified by the zombies. A lot of kids would just be losing their minds when they got to the exit. But because I'm a jerk, that exit was fake. It was one of those heavy metal doors with the push bar on it. It led to another part of the building, but it looked like an exit. So, I put a sign on it that said thanks for coming. Please exit quietly. So, the kids would be freaking out and the same thing would happen over and over. The parents would say, it's okay. It's over, look see. It's the end. And the kids would be relieved, and they would run for the door. They'd push it open and Leatherface would blast his chainsaw right in their face. I worked on a haunted train. The train would ride from one station to the other and back, while workers in scary costumes walked into each car. I was wearing a gimp mask while waiting on the train platform for the next round of customers to board. The platform is directly across from a restaurant with outdoor seating and there were 2 women having dinner and facing the train station. I stood directly across from them and just stared with the mask on. They were talking so they didn't notice me for a couple of minutes. Waiting paid off, because one of them finally saw me and screamed at the top of her lungs. Everyone else at the restaurant looked to see what was happening. The other girl was laughing her off. I waved and boarded the train. We had a haunted trail and a hayride through a haunted forest at the place I worked when I was a teen. One part of the forest was really dense and had trees packed in close, and at that part of the ride the park owners decked the trees out in all shades of neon glow-in-the-dark streamers and placed black lights to make it really trippy. Usually, as the hayride started into that section, clowns would start flitting between the trees, inching closer and closer to the ride until the kids, and plenty of the adults, lost it. One day, the clowns decided to bring along coolers with beer and have a little party. They ended up getting so drunk that about half of them laid down on the trail to stop the hay truck, and the other half tried to hijack the thing, hollering about raising their pay. Another time, we trail tour guides deviated from the script a bit with a gag about an escaped convict, and a couple people called 911. When I was a little kid, I was walking through a haunted house that was set up in a couple rooms in a school or something, and I turned a corner and saw some middle-aged woman screaming and violently stomping out some guy who was dressed up as a scarecrow. I think his job was to lay on the ground, and just kind of lurch forward at people as they walked by, and he scared the lady so badly that she just started to curb stomping. She eventually stopped after he started screaming, and he just kind of got up and limped out of the room. My family used to run a haunted house through my high school years, when me and my friends could help out. We went all out, we hand-built a couple of coffins, we had a small airplane that had been sitting in a junkyard delivered to our backyard that we haunted and let people walk through, we had rooms designed to disorient people with bright strobe lights and checkerboard walls, and a lot of other generally scary. In one of the strobe rooms, we dressed a guy up in a checkerboard suit, hat and makeup, and you wouldn't be able to see him plainly standing in the middle of the room. He scared the piss out of a few people. After they were done with that room, they had to walk through me standing in a coffin pretending to be a mannequin. I took it very seriously, and the best one was after a young boy peed his pants in the strobe room. His mom and young sister were standing in front of me, talking to my dad about it, basically shooting. The daughter whispered to mom, that doll in the coffin moved, and the mom came right up to me, poked me, watched me, and said, "No honey, it's not real." Well, I was, and still am, real, and all 3 of them were scared of their pants. 100% ratio on that tour. I volunteered for a local haunted house for 1 year and made a girl pee herself. Literally all I did was stand right on the other side of the door and put on the evilest grin I could conjure up. I was dressed as some kind of crazy blood-soaked mailman or something. They didn't give me any lines or directions, they basically just told me to be scary. So, some poor girl walked in, held in the arms of her boyfriend, and upon seeing me she screamed so loudly and just wet her pants right there. Her boyfriend just kept pushing her through my room and into the next. It was an interesting experience. I was working at a haunted house at an amusement park near my hometown and I was cast as a victim. So, one night this couple passes me and one of the actors comes running at me, so I start to scream bloody murder. The look on the boyfriend's face was of utter terror. He picked his girlfriend up and swung me over his shoulder and ran us out of the area and almost past the front gate. Security had to block his way, then reason with him to put us down. When I was 17, I was working in one as a scarecrow. Many people didn't know I was real because I only scared 1 out of every 10 people or so. I saw a bachelorette party come in. They all had matching green tube tops. I jumped out and screamed at the third woman in line, out of 8 or so. She jumped and screamed so badly that her breasts popped out of her shirt. She fell down against a wall and sat there for a moment, not realizing her breasts were out. One of them said, Sarah? Look down. She quickly looked down, blushed, and fixed her shirt. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the first pair of tits I'd seen in my life. My friend's job was to be live bait. That was the term the organizer for the Boy Scouts in my area had. I was the chainsaw murderer to take the bait. Basically, what my friend did was join people's groups at the door and act really scared. Introducing himself as Brian, he would do things like ask people's names, about their kids, and say how creeped out he was. Brian would say that this place wasn't like other haunted house setups he'd been to. That gave him a weird feeling. He'd gain their trust and act like a normal human being. Walking into the room, he'd signal me, spin around and say that he wasn't feeling scared at all anymore. He'd act perfectly fine. Still walking backwards, he'd stop right in front of my closet, or I'd rev the chainsaw, and stick it under his left arm. It'd look like I had just impaled him on my chainsaw. He'd scream and yell, run, and just scream. Normally, people would be scared absolutely and run out of the room. Once there was a group with just a girl and a boy walking with Brian. This one girl was not simply scared by this, she was mortified. She faints and drops straight on the floor. The boyfriend freaks out and ditches her. He drops the tough guy look, bolts, and doesn't look back. So, Brian and I are standing there, looking at the girl. I turn off my chainsaw, look him square in the face and say, well. I end up carrying this ditzy, glittered-up girl all the way back to the very front of the house. I put her in a chair and waited for her to come around. When she regains consciousness, she flips again, because I was that bastard that killed Brian. Naturally, I had Brian sitting next to her, and he reassured her that he was okay, and not in fact, dead. Then we explained to her that her sew up and ditched her with a murderer in the room. We waited for almost a half hour for her to get a hold of her boyfriend, and to chew him out over the phone about leaving her. She refused to have him pick her up, and she chose to wait for her parents by going through the haunted house with Brian. Having worked in a local house for a few years, I've seen some hilarious things. Among them, a super tough guy who's giving his girlfriend for being creeped out. I pop out behind him in full costume as Jason, which elicits a high-pitched shriek from him. He's backing up further until my friend, in full Freddy regalia, sneaks into his blind spot. Man runs, slams into a wall, and knocks himself stupid. Girl laughed. Was hard not to hide our shoulders from bouncing up and down from laughter. I was dressed as a vampire and standing in a coffin. When people would come around the corner, I would jump out and scare them. A woman came through and I jumped out. The woman lets out this piercing scream and jumps backwards. She hit the wall so hard she dented it pretty badly. She kept screaming and wouldn't stop. She was hyperventilating, crying, on and on. I was afraid to approach her and make it worse. I had to completely drop character and tell one of the guests to go get an unaccustomed worker to assist her. Someone comes, gets her calmed down. She even talks to me and finally laughs about it. She leaves and I'm so relieved she was okay, but it really shook me up. 30 minutes later, she comes back. I don't jump out of the coffin, I just walk out and say, "What are you doing here?" She gets this embarrassed look on her face and says, "I had fun." Looking back on it, the funniest part was the looks on the faces of the people behind her in the line the second time. To them, this vampire just walks out of a coffin and gets all bossy with some random woman. Former Universal's Halloween Horror Nights lead here. People get scared. I saw someone OD right in front of me. I've had others just freak out and fight the scare actors, some drop into a corner sobbing and have to be carried out. Depressants, hallucinogens, etc. cocktails for these dehydrated people and introduce them into environments meant to disorient and frighten you. It's like the 4th of July for users. Not personally witnessed, but here's my story. About 6 years ago, I worked at a haunt in North Carolina. In one part of the trail, there were body bags that contained mannequins, except one that had a coworker inside. He freaked out a lot of people, but one group came through, drunk and high, got really freaked out and beat him pretty badly. He got sent to the hospital, they got sent to jail. I was a walk-around character at Six Flags for 1 year. At night, I dressed as a scarecrow. For the record, I was terrifying, and walked around the park, freaking people out. One night, not 20 minutes into my shift, I found a few high school kids running up behind. As I got close and they started to scream, I got doused with ice water. Keep in mind, it was late October in Louisville, so it was around 40 degrees. I expected to find somebody when I turned around. It was a teacher that was chaperoning a field trip. I asked her why she did it. She said, "You were about to scare those kids." No. Well, this happened to me as a visitor to a haunted house, not a worker. We had made it all the way to the final room. We knew it was the last room because it was let out right by the line we stood in to enter the house. It was all black and white checkered walls with strobe lights, and a guy, also in black and white, with a chainsaw chasing people out. I was the first to enter, sufficiently terrified of the rest of the house at this point. Chainsaw Man must have noticed my apprehension upon entering the room because he went right for me. I screamed and sprinted for the exit door, which of course was painted like the rest of the room. At full force I hit what I was hoping was the door. It wasn't. I made a full speed faceplant into a very solid wall. Put my front teeth through my lip, howled in pain and started crying. All my friends had exited out of the actual exit, so it was just me and Chainsaw Man. I thought that was it for me. As he got closer, he saw that I was hurt, not just screaming in terror. So now the Chainsaw Man puts his chainsaw down and carries me out of the house, past all the other people in line waiting to enter, to the medical staff. I can only imagine what everyone in line thought as one of the monsters was carrying this screaming, crying, bloody kid out of the place. I like to think it put them all a little more on edge as they approached the entrance. Not the worst, but certainly funny. I worked a haunted hayride with my sister for 1 year and it was my job to get in line, ride with everyone else and get pulled off the wagon and murdered by my sister at the vampire station. One iteration, there was this teenage girl who was terrified. I sat next to her and pointed out how fake everything looked and how she didn't have anything to worry about. When we got to my sister's station and she ripped me off the wagon and threw me to the ground, I started screaming, "It's real! Oh my God, it's real!" The look of absolute unbridled abject horror in her eyes as the wagon rolled off into the darkness was one I'll never forget. Also, I am a horrible person. Don't upvote this. I played a zombie in a strobe light hallway along with someone else. He was in a straitjacket and would violently hit the chair against the wall while he was sitting down on it, and I would just stare at people as they walked by because I had been told that I had a really creepy smile with zombie makeup on. One of the groups that walked through was around 5 elderly folks. After my hallway partner did his jump scare, an old guy from that group started laughing. Then he saw me, laughed even more, but started coughing violently. He leaned against the wall, grabbing his chest, while he slowly fell towards the ground. My hallway partner and I just stood there in shock, frozen, not knowing what to do. I wasn't sure if I should call 911 or what. His friends weren't helping him. But a couple of seconds later, he gets up, points, and laughs at us. Every year my OA Lodge, Boy Scout Honor Society thing, holds a haunted walk for Cub Scouts and anyone else who wants to go. This walk takes place in a very overgrown field, aka very tall grass, and ends in an old barn. 2 years ago, our theme was zombies. One of the last skit sections was set up as a police/FBI barricade, flashing lights and all. So, the group turns the corner after being scared and see the flashing lights and become hopeful that the scar is over. Unluckily for them, that is where I come in, a 6 feet 6 inches tall guy. I am walking towards the group, hunched over to the point where to them it looks like I am maybe 5 feet tall. As soon as I hear the kids start to ask their parents what that thing is, I jump up to full height and sprint at them with a death wail coming out of my mouth. The group splits down the middle as I run through, and suddenly, I have to dodge a kid thrust at me by his father who is yelling "take him" with tears of fright in his eyes. My parents met for the first time in a haunted house. My father was working there for the summer, and his job was to stand beneath the stairs, and shake some of the loose steps back and forth, while making scary noises, etc. Well, one night, my mother and some of her friends went through said haunted house. They eventually made it to the stairs where my father worked. He shook one of the steps, and my mother stumbled, breaking the heel off her high-heeled boots. She put up a stink, and got my father fired. So, for years after that, they told the story, my father claiming some weird got him fired, and my mother claiming some douche almost killed her in a haunted house. It wasn't until they were dating, about 4 years later, that they figured it out. When I was in 2nd grade, my daycare put on a haunted house for the parents. I was in my own room, dressed as a ghost, and was supposed to say boo. When the guests started walking in, I began to cry because I was scared of them, the strobe light, and the loud music. One of the daycare staff had to sit with me while I cried and said boo to the people walking by. I worked security at one for a while. There was an area where you went through a maze and the walls were a mix of jail-style bars and mirrors. The room was filled with fog and super bright strobe lights. Here's the kicker. One of the walls could be moved to close the maze and send the person into a circle with no way out. The employees were allowed to send people into the loop, which only added like 3 minutes to the time. Well, the room itself was referred to as the seizure room. At least every other day someone had a seizure in there. One night a kid gets sent into the circle, and because of the dense fog and frequent moving of staff, gave you a killer headache to be in there too long. No one noticed he didn't come out. About 30 minutes later a patron starts yelling and we see him. Other patrons had seen him but assumed it was a prop. He had a seizure and hit his head when he fell. Lots of blood. He was okay when the ambulance took him out. Just a really bad head laceration. Many rules were made about the maze after that. I went to a haunted house with my family when I was about 10. My little sister, 8 at the time, kept insisting that she wanted to go off alone. She wasn't allowed to, but at some point she snuck off. Well, the haunted house closed, and my family are all sitting outside of the entrance waiting for her to come out. The majority of it is a maze, with a guy with a chainsaw chasing you around. That actor came out and talked to us, and we told him my little sister's name. So, he goes around the maze screaming, "Brittany, I'm going to find you. You better get out of this maze," for like 10 minutes, and then she finally comes running out, sobbing with a bright red face. I went to a haunted house. Some guy jumped out at us waving a chainsaw. He was really sad when we laughed, but then we told him that there was a group of middle school boys right behind us. He thanked us for the tip and went to lay in wait for them. About 60 seconds later, they ran past us at full speed with him chasing them as fast as he could. It was hilarious. It wasn't as hilarious when we went to the next room and the kids decided that we were close enough to grown-ups to count. They, all 4 of them, grabbed us by the arms and would not let go until we had safely escorted them out of the haunted house. I was at a haunted house and the room we were in was a very, very dark maze. Someone dressed in black reached out and touched me. I screamed and punched him as hard as I could in the torso, just below the point where the ribs come together. Then I apologized about 100 times. Poor guy. I went to a local haunted house with my cousins and uncle when I was about 12. Another cousin was working and told the guy in the chainsaw room to give her little cousins a special show. He came after us with the chainsaw and backed us into a corner. I collapsed on the ground in a fetal position and put my arms over my head and refused to move. If he'd been a real slasher, I would have been dead in 30 seconds. I've worked several seasons at a haunted house, and I've seen some drunks throw up, pass out, etc., but the weird thing that has happened several times is that sometimes when I jump out and scare a female customer, her reaction will be to kiss me. The first time, I just thought, okay, that was weird, interesting girl. But then it happened several more times. I think it's just some kind of weird defense mechanism. I mean, I think they must know that they're not in actual danger, but by kissing they are quickly negotiating the social situation into a non-scary situation that they are in control of. It's happened to several of the guys that have worked here. But it's never happened to Lance. Sorry, bro. Maybe this year. When I was younger, like middle school age, we had a haunted woods in our town. It was run by the athletic association, so some of the kids would help prepare. A few 10 to 12-year-olds were used for a portion of the walk since their parents were the spoolers. The kids would blend into the groups and would run out and grab their kid. The kid would yell and scream for help and people would get pretty freaked out. My brother was one of those kids and it was going pretty well for a few hours. So my brother hops in with the group they go through and one of the guys, a werewolf, runs out and picks him up. Now at no point in the many times they did this did anybody ever step up to save him or do anything. This time, a little girl, like 5 to 7, starts attacking the werewolf and telling him to put him down now. So they were both shocked and my brother just continued through the rest of the woods. Pretty courageous little girl. It's 2009, in New Orleans. The setting, House of Shock. House of Shock starts with a stage show, which is followed by a zombie graveyard tour and haunted house, while chased by men with chainsaws. So, the stage show. Before the assembled mass, a demon and an angel are fighting over the souls of the audience. The demon is winning. The angel cries in fury as the demon kills him, and with his final breath screams a question to those watching: who is your champion? Who do you choose? With triumph in his voice, a true New Orleanian replies with the only possible answer. Drew Brees. I work in a haunted house around this time of year, and it is surprisingly laid back. There are a few rooms that have set consumers and set people, but about 50% of the rooms are just grab a costume and be scary. The final room is a clown room, and that's the room me and most of my friends would take and scare people. The most common thing to happen is for people to just freeze. They just stop in the middle of the tour and scream. The only way to get them to move is to come out of character and tell them they have to go. My favorite spot is after the clown room. You make a hard right and go down a long dark hallway to leave. Right outside of the room there is a little nook that you can sit if you were to go left out of the clown room instead of a right down that hallway. Anyways, the funniest thing I've ever seen had to be the time I was sitting in that nook with a chainsaw and safe first person came around the corner. They didn't see me, so when I revved the chainsaw she took off running and only got about 2 steps before promptly falling on her face. This is where it gets good, with it being a dark hallway. The rest of the tour also took off running from hearing the chainsaw, and one after another they fell. The pile up at the end was somewhere between 8 to 10 people. I had to put the chainsaw down and go help, but I hardly could. I was laughing so hard. Sorry about the poor storytelling. I volunteered at a haunted house as a zombie with a friend. Our area was a graveyard, and we were supposed to jump out of our graves, cut carpet over a wooden stage, and shake the chain link fence that was a partial barrier between our guests and us. As they passed us we jumped the fence and chased them out of the room. Enter a young couple and their toddler. I hope the fence pig squealing and the child turns around and assumedly messes himself as he gets in the fetal position and bawls. I was just like, oh sorry. The parents laughed. I was in a room full of bizarre dressed up mannequins and had on heavy prosthetics. One of my scares I used was to stand super still, and everyone always thought I was a mannequin, too. I heard a couple enter my section and held perfectly still. They were probably in their late 30s. They decided to sneak right behind my counter, and he started fingering her right at my feet. I wanted to scare them so badly and decided to wait till they were done to really freak them out. A few more visitors passed through, and I didn't move to scare them at all. The guy finishes and stands up. He then rabbit punches me, still thinking I'm a mannequin, as hard as he can. He falls back into an operating table in shock. She starts screaming, pulls up her pants and jets out of the room, and he finally manages to back out of the room, repeating, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. My string quartet worked a gig at a local haunted house. The place was in our local mall, and the scariest thing was probably the vision loss from the several dozen strobe lights, because the abandoned Dillards gave nothing to the atmosphere. Anyways, I followed a group of girls I recognized and hated from school and started screeching on my violin in the scariest way possible. Mind you, I had nothing remotely scary on, unless an ankle-length skirt gives you the willies, and some zombies make up. I ran up and started playing over someone's shoulder, and the girl ran out of our section and then screamed, "I'll play the viola," before leaving. My friend, the violist, had to take a break from laughing so hard. A few years ago, a haunted Storm Stadium featured a walkthrough with an evil Alice in Wonderland theme. One of the rooms had many doors and only one could open. A young teen was on the floor in that room, and he was clearly in shock. My brother and I went through twice, and he hadn't left. The Alice in this room didn't break character and asked us if we knew the way out and did not reassure him or offer to help him. I didn't witness the incident, but I got to see the aftermath. We had a Silent Hill room with like a dozen zombie nurses in it, 2 of which were actual people instead of dummies. Looking into it, you could not tell which was a dummy and which was a real person. These girls were that good at staying perfectly still. A patron came into the room, a typical frat boy bro type guy, and he just cocks back and hits one of the nurses full on in the face. Too bad that nurse was one of the 2 girls in the room. She's out cold for at least 20 minutes with blood pouring out of her face the whole time from her crushed nose and missing teeth. We had to have her rushed to a hospital. The other girl in the room thankfully got a decent look at the person who did it, and we shut the whole thing down while we sent the police officers in looking for him. They caught him and dragged him in cuffs. I don't know the details after that, but I do know charges were filed against him and the girl made a full recovery after a nose job and some teeth implants. I once volunteered at a haunted house when I was 16. I was the introduction sort of. I had a mad scientist costume on, and I was sitting at a desk petting a rat. When people opened the door, I was supposed to look up and say welcome as creepily as possible. Well, a group of teenage girls walk in and I'm like, this is going to be a good scare. So, I say my line and all of them get scared except one. She just kind of looks at me, then looks at her friends and says, "He's kind of cute." The rest of them were just like, "Oh my god, you can't say that here," and I just facepalmed as they left into the next room. I volunteer at a local haunted house, which is held at an old nun convent. I'm dressed wearing a Jason outfit, and I carry a steel machete. I grinded down the blade so I don't accidentally chop someone, and stand at the end of a hallway that guests have to walk towards before entering another room. It's near impossible to see me due to a strobe setup they walk towards, until you are about 10 feet from me. I end up running down the hall grinding the steel machete against the old plaster walls, creating a spine-shivering shing noise, grabbing the attention of anyone in front of me. After that I'm smashing a wooden temporary wall feet in front of them. This one particular group was full of older teenagers, a few guys, and a few girls. One of the girls fell backwards and onto the ground, causing the rest of them to pile up on top of her. They all started crying as I stood over them grinding the machete against the wall. 2 of the girls scared themselves. That was just 2 of my many confirmed pant peelers. Worked at a place called Fright Nights in West Palm Beach when I was in high school. There was a tram what would ride guests through the haunt, and we were allowed to climb and crawl on it as long as we didn't touch them. That was until one of the employees jumped on top of it from a tree and broke his leg, and it became incredibly angry with the tram. Also, don't bring your infants/toddlers, seriously? This is common knowledge, no 3-year-old should be subjected to that. Years ago, when I was in college, I did a summer at a haunted house. My character was a mostly monochromatic clown named Stitches. He had a big scar across his face that was stitched shut from forehead to cheek across nose. My favorite scare setup to get people was in the dining room. The room had a few good hiding spots, and there was a door I could use to get behind them very easily. I would be as sneaky as possible and get as close to them from behind as I could. I would then squirt them with water from the flower on my shirt, then when they turn around give the best evil laugh, think Crypt Keeper from Tales from the Crypt, I could while holding my knife. At this time, while they are focused on me, my clown friend gets out of his hiding spot and gets as close to them as possible, honking his horn, laughing, and holding an axe. One night a college couple came through. I get behind them and squirt them with water. They turn around and I present them with my laugh, both of them scream, and turn to run. This is the time they see my partner. They turn and go down the hallway, and the girl drops. I ask in a normal voice, "Are you okay?" There was no response. I radio in that we needed help. I was in full makeup and gloves, which I am not able to take off myself. I can't check my pulse. I am freaking out, as I am thinking, I just killed this girl. My partner is frozen, he does absolutely nothing. To make the situation worse, the girl's boyfriend bolted. The chainsaw guy was the only other human scared after our station. The chainsaw guy chased him out, then our boss told him to get the boyfriend. Chainsaw guy, "Hey buddy, do you have a girlfriend?" Boyfriend, "I did but I think the clowns killed her," he says while chuckling. Once help gets there, we had a couple EMTs on scene, they tell me, and the other clown to leave is the last thing she needs to see when she comes to is the killer clowns. They resuscitated her and got her out of the house. Apparently she actually died for a few seconds in there. The EMTs said she should be fine after some treatment and rest. Every year my neighborhood gets together to put together a Halloween block party the weekend prior to Halloween. It had a tiki bar for parents to go get liquor from, a haunted house set up for kids and adults to go through, made out of plywood, bounce houses and other kids' attractions, and food. Everyone in the neighborhood participated in it somehow or another. I was a regular staff member in the haunted house. I was no holds bars and really creative as a kid, so my scaring spots were usually some of the best and most unexpected. I'm talking about dropping out of the roof, popping out of hay bales, distracting people with a dummy then scaring them, the works. The area the haunted house and block party were at in the neighborhood was usually where everyone gathered after trick or treating in the neighborhood, so while the haunted house was up, we still had people come through it. In my city, we got a ton of press, so we had people from neighborhoods all over coming in. Now to the story. One Halloween, after getting all of my candy, I went to the haunted house and scared people no matter what their age. We had this one kid show up who went to school with most of the neighborhood kids but didn't actually live there. He lived in a nicer area and regularly acted like he was better than us, so no one liked him. All week at school he bragged about not being scared of anything and that our haunted house couldn't scare him, so when we saw him come towards it with his parents, we got stoked and decided to go all out. I hid in a tree at the end of the haunted house to give them one last scare. They made their way through, and they were screaming. The mom, the dad, and the kid. Just freaking out, because we were demon children and got a fix for that type of fear. They came out of the haunted house relieved thinking it was over, so once they caught their breaths, and the fog machine went off, I made my leap out of the tree, landing less than 3 feet in front of them. I scared the kid, literally. I made him scared himself, his mom fainted, but the worst was his dad. The person's kid's dad was so scared he turned and ran into the wall of the haunted house, hitting his head. This caused him to stumble back and fall on the metal picket fence behind him, somewhat impaling himself on it. So, I'm sitting there, still scared of the kid, mom on the ground, dad sitting there being impaled on the fence. I thought it was fake, it wasn't, the dad almost died, he pulled himself off the fence, almost disemboweling himself in front of his kid while they think his wife is dead from a heart attack. I worked at a hunky-dory haunted attraction for 4 years. My second year in the woods, there's a particularly intense part where you are rushed by bloody machete men. This made a girl drop and begin seizing, but this was a haunted walk so the paramedics were not able to get to her easily. My boss loaded her up on a trailer attached to a lawnmower and she took a slow ride of shame to the ambulance. All was okay though. Also at least once every year an actor gets punched in the face hard. I work at just a local haunted house, but we still manage to put on some pretty intense houses. We use a lot of completely dark passages that will light up when people are at a certain spot and there will usually be something really fed up right in front of them that makes lots of noise. Well anyways, last year as I was working in this one house I was stationed in that area, the gag was that I had a chainsaw and when the lights went on I was sawing into another person and blood was spewing everywhere and just general loud noises. This one lady came through and she was with her boyfriend and one younger child. It scared her really badly, she was the worst screamer that whole night, just a blood-curdling scream. After they left I noticed when the lights came on for the next victim that there was trash all over the floor. The previous lady had been wearing a skirt and I guess went commando and trash all over our floor from being scared. We had to shut the house down for like 20 minutes while we cleaned up it. It was disgusting. I work at a haunted house, and I am pretty extreme. I have Madagascar hissing cockroaches climbing all over me. I eat worms, dig chicken bones out of the garbage, dig dirty diapers that were placed in the garbage by me earlier in the night that are filled with Nutella, and proceed to eat it in front of crowds, and let people put cigarettes out on my tongue. I have caused multiple people to vomit in line due to the disgusting nature of my act. Why one person throws up, multiple people tend to vomit. We had to close down the haunt for half an hour to clean up. I was in a haunted house when I was young, and I was absolutely bawling crying. My brother, trying to lighten, after a guy jumped out, shouted, "Why would you do that?" To which he answered sheepishly, "It's my job, sorry." The only reason I got out without wetting myself was because bro got out his iPod and made me listen to Funky Town on repeat until we got out. Good times. Had a two-way mirror on one side of my door. My partner would flip the switch, then I'd scream and holler and beat on the window that I would kill them. Anyway, they would pass through and I would pop out from behind a black cloth. Not even 5 seconds later, this 6 feet 3 inches teenage guy, completely sober, sees me, 5 feet 1 inch petted female, and decides to punch me in the throat, straight face. He then comes to my chainsaw room on the other side of the door 10 minutes later and punches my partner with the chainsaw. Needless to say, someone has assault charges over something stupid. I used to work in a very prominent haunted attraction in the Northeast, continuously for 4 years. While working, I've given people panic/asthma attacks, forced them into fake walls, gotten them to trip and fall. I have made large men scream like little girls. Feelsgoodman.jpg. I've seen some belligerent behavior from people who think it's funny to show up to these attractions drunk or otherwise impaired. I was a volunteer throughout my working there. Not one person got paid for any of the time spent setting up the attraction or working there during hours of operation. All proceeds went to various local charities, and still do today. There was a story a few years ago about tools used in a murder being hidden in a haunted house nearby. The media sensationalized it quite a bit. The haunted house debunked it on their Facebook. It's time to set the record straight. There are a lot of rumors circulating right now about a prop from our attraction being used in a local crime. The fact is, no prop from redacted haunted attraction was used as a murder weapon. A garden tool belonging to an accomplice was hidden by him on our property. It was never at any time used as a prop. The redacted police department notified us in 2011 that an item of interest may be on our property. With our permission, the police came, searched, and found the garden tool hidden on the redacted property. Just to be clear, the props we use and approve at redacted are fake. They are made of foam, rubber, plastic, or some other lightweight material in order to ensure the safety of our customers and actors. This is a case of media sensationalism, trying to draw the attention away from a murderer and placing the attention on the more interesting character. This is not the latest news. This crime occurred over a year and a half ago and, redacted, has already pleaded guilty and been sentenced for his role as an accomplice in helping to cover up a murder. Our thoughts and prayers remain with the victim's family. My brother. He devised this special maze made up of prefabricated frames with painted brick on them. They were obviously just wood frames with fabric over them, but the point of it was to get through the scary maze. He himself, as coordinator and creator of this maze, was on a catwalk above dressed in all black, with a walkie. The best part of this maze? He had 2 other volunteers outside who would move parts of the framework, and my brother would tell them what piece to move, when people weren't looking. It was brilliant. Here are the 2 best occurrences. There were 2 girls, around 14 to 15, walking through the maze, already frightened by the other actors, and looking confused around the maze, wondering what would jump out at them next. After bumping into dead ends for a while, they came to the pinch, which was a long hallway with a dead end around a sharp corner. They walk around the corner, see the dead end, and my brother tells one of the volunteers to move, blocking off the hallway. As the girls, in tandem, turn around and scream at the now blocked off hallway, he tells the other actor to move in closer. The girls literally kept screaming and holding each other as the 2 hallways closed in until they were practically touching them, only to have my brother tell the actors to duck out some of the other frameworks, leaving the 2 girls standing in a suddenly empty hallway. The second part is where he attempted to do this to a little old lady, who, after seeing the back end of the hallway she just came through blocked off, proceeded to beat at the wall with her purse, kick the actor over wall and all, and walk over him to exit. In high school I volunteered for a haunted train ride. We weren't on the train itself, but alongside the tracks on either side. Guests would look out and see several scenes along the way. Our scene was a little campsite, where I and a girl sat around a campfire. Then as the train passed, a masked guy with a chainsaw came out revving his saw in our faces. He cuts off my fake arm, gives me a good slash across the chest and then chases the girl into the tent. The tent was backlit so you could see the gruesome scene from the train. Obviously, we had no chain on the saw, for safety. During one run, after he slashed my arm, the tip of the saw hit the ground pretty hard. It broke something at the end of the saw. The self-oiling mechanism of the saw that normally keeps the chain lubricated started squirting the oil out like crazy. So, when he went to attack the girl in the tent, the oil started splashing all over her. In the heat of the moment, she felt this liquid hitting her and thought it was her own blood. She screamed in actual fear, thinking something had gone wrong and she was being murdered. He thought, wow. She's really getting into the part, and gave the saw a few extra revs to play along. We didn't know anything was wrong until after the train had passed and we realized she was still screaming. We had to find a different girl after that. Working the haunted house one night with my then girlfriend, Jane from here on, in the asylum room, a walkway for patrons around three sides of a large, 15 foot by 15 foot by 6 foot tall, cell/cage with mental patients in it. On the opposite side of the walkway from the main cage includes several smaller cages that will fit 1 to 3 people, think prison bars with plenty of room to reach through. No masks on anyone, just really good makeup. Now Jane, she'd had a farming accident when she was young, lost one of her legs a few inches below the knee as a result, and had a prosthetic. We'd pulled off the prosthetic and smeared her leg up with some Instar scab, gives you a nice thick crusty bloody fake scab in like 2 minutes, and some stage blood to boot. She's screaming at people, he's got my leg. Make him give it back, while in a straitjacket, and I'm gnawing on her fake leg and her beating it against the bars while laughing at her and screaming at them. We were having a grand old time of it. Then this woman, I'd guess her to be in her 20s, we were late teens ourselves, but adults, comes up to Jane, reaches through the bars saying that's really cool. How'd you do that, and grabs Jane's leg nub. Jane smiles at her, says like this, and moves the muscles in her leg up. I've felt it myself, the sensation is unusual. This woman's mouth drops, she takes 2 steps back, screams, and drops into the fetal position, breathing like she is hyperventilating and sobbing hysterically all at once. Staff were called in after a few completely useless moments of trying to console her, and they carried her out. Jane got the award for Best Scare of the Night that night, and later an Epic Scare award from the people running the haunted house. Been in the haunt industry for 17 years. I've personally slit my throat on an overhead trapdoor and bled all over customers. I've seen a stagehand fall through a trapdoor and shatter her leg during a magic show. My second year in the business I was a little overzealous with the chainsaw and hit a customer in the face, giving them a shallow Chelsea smile. Last week an actor's appendix burst while we were open. I'm sure I'm forgetting a million things. I wasn't a worker, just a 13-year-old kid on a haunted hayride somewhere in northern PA. I was with 2 of my best friends and a girl I was crushing on hard. We had planned on just playing along with the ride cause, you know, we were badass teenagers and weren't afraid of the dark. The hayride had gone through some forest and cornfields, with strange sounds every so often, screams, banging, gunshots, creepy headless people, vampires, and werewolves, you know, the usual. We were having a good time, and the girl was holding onto my arm tight, totally digging me. We get through most of it, the driver is telling us they have hot apple cider and cookies back at the house, but when we pass this creepy old barn, the wagon gets stuck in the mud, the horses get free somehow and gallop at full speed out of Dodge. This really maniacal laughter coming from the woods sends chills down my spine. The driver was freaking out, saying things like, "This isn't supposed to happen," gets hit with an arrow to the neck and falls off. 3 hooded figures come really quickly from the trees on either side of us with a chainsaw and an axe and pull him back into the trees to cut him up or something. He's screaming his head off, really realistic, and we're all huddled at the far end of the wagon, pretty close to being scared. I guess it hadn't occurred to us, having been just playing along with it, that it was a part of the show. We were past that naivete. This was for reals for all we cared. Then this big guy came walking slowly up the path in front of us with a torch, wearing only torn up Carhartt overalls. He jumps up on the wagon, puts the torch up to his face, all scarred and bloody, and says, "We didn't think you kids would make it this far, and now you're going to pay for it." The girlie dies first. Mahasaba, or something to that effect, and goes reaching for the girl. Being the hot-headed 13-year-old I was, I jumped up and punched him square in the face. It doesn't do harm or anything to him, but he plays along, falls off the wagon, and we take off for the house, flat-out sprint for those cookies and hot cider. We get there, eat, and drink, and just laugh about it. Later I learned it was my friend's dad whom I punched. He still to this day tells me he'll get me back good. I got my first kiss because of that, so hells yes, it's worth the embarrassment I get when he tells the story at our late summer bonfires. I work in what we call the dark maze. I wear solid black aside from my face mask, which I custom painted glow in dark. I built the maze and work in it with my best friend every year. We know it goes forward and backward every corner and trapdoor, so we walk backward all the time. I heard a rather loud yell from the other side of the maze. When I made my way over there, it was my best friend telling a guy to get the hell out of here. He backed up straight into a guy beating off. Relying on a story from another actor who was stalking the hallways of our local house some years ago. Enter a young mother and father with their 5-year-old daughter. The parents are very encouraging, continually telling the girl, "We've got you, you're safe, they're just playing, no one's going to hurt you," etc. Dad's in front, then mom, holding the girl to her chest such the girl is looking behind them over mom's shoulder. He lets them get ahead of him in a dark patch of hallway, then follows them as they enter a section that's better lit. Both parents are facing forward, so the girl is the first and only one to see the weird man behind them with a crowbar. And her face lights up with a huge grin. While the parents continue their assurances, the actor mouths to the girl, "You want me to scare them?" Still grinning, she gives an excited nod. Okay, then counting with his fingers, 1, 2, 3. He then screams bloody murder and slams the crowbar into the wooden walls. The whole party bolts down the hallway, 2 adults screaming for their lives accompanied by a delighted peal of 5-year-old girl laughter. I worked at a church haunted house fundraiser a few years back. I was told to just be scary, so I could ad-lib most of it. Well, I decided that the scariest thing I could do was just change positions from time to time, stand stock still the rest. Well, it worked. I was scared of a few girls working there. They threw a shoe at me to decide whether or not I was real. They came back later, I took a step towards them, and they took off. It was hilarious. Also, I caused a few other people to cry. I was volunteering for my haunted house as a fundraiser. The theme was hospital, and my room was the morgue. It was a regular-sized classroom, and we had the people walk around in a circle. In the middle were boxes we used as coffins and jumped out at people. I played the comic relief of warning of the dangers of hypertension. The last guy was in a box that looked just like a filing cabinet. Anyway, 2 girls came in and they became so scared that as far as they could be from the door, they went into shock and couldn't move. They just kept screaming so loudly, "Move. I can't. Eventually they ran right through everything, knocking it all over. They didn't even get to me. I was haunting in a cornfield maze. My manager had a 3-foot chainsaw, and he was great at sneaking up on people. I wasn't that scared, but I was good at leading people into him. So, I lead these kids to him and they're screaming and running. Then the chainsaw comes on and they're stuck between us. So, they dodge into the corn off the path. Figuring this won't work, they come back, and this one kid trips and falls and, you guessed it, got knighted by the chainsaw. He wouldn't move, so eventually my manager had to turn the chainsaw off and tell him to go away. I have quite a few stories from my 7 years working at a certain amusement park's Halloween festivity. I didn't work in a haunted house, but roamed the park. One year I was dressed as a clown based on it. I had heard a teenage girl screaming and running down the road from behind me. Now at this point I had another employee giving me updates on when she was getting near me. Next thing I know, I am hearing her say, "I need to go to the bathroom. Don't scare me." I was standing directly in front of the women's bathroom entrance, and I just couldn't help myself. As she approached me through the fog, I turned around and screamed within a couple inches of her face. Her response was to immediately fall down onto the ground, where she went completely silent. I stood over her for a second and then realized why she was not moving. I was standing over an 18-year-old girl who was currently peeing her pants on the ground of an amusement park in public. She slowly stood up holding her crotch and waddled into the bathroom. I saw her parents and better yet, a boyfriend walked up, and I just couldn't help but laugh. 15 minutes later I saw the mom walk into the bathroom with a brand new pair of sweatpants. I won Monster of the Night that night. But it wasn't the last time I made someone pee their pants by scaring them. I was going through a haunted house at the Iowa Fairgrounds, and at one point you're going through this corridor that is pitch black and a really tight fit. I'm feeling around with my hands stretched out in front of me. Apparently there was a worker standing in them to scare people, and of course I didn't see him. I ended up running my hand seductively down his face and feeling the wetness of his lips on my fingers. Exchanged an awkward sorry bro in the dark and went our separate ways. Not quite a haunted house employee, but back when I was living in Vancouver, Canada, I had decorated the house, which was quite massive with stones, plus it had the creepy trees in front of it, with a bunch of cobwebs, fake blood spatter, do not enter signs, a fog machine and dry ice. For the extra mile I had played creepy sound effects on the stereo that could be heard from down the street. There was only one light on, which was the house lamppost, not the city lamps, and it illuminated the front entrance porch with the old bench. I dressed up as a scarecrow, a blend of Freddy Krueger and Jeepers Creepers. I sat on that bench, motionless. Needless to say, I had scared a few kids. However, there were some high school teens that I noticed. They were egging the house, ruining the decor, chucking empty beer and vodka bottles. And they also broke the fog machine. They then went on the scarecrow. Being 6 feet 4 inches and quite big, I just stood up. They then proceeded to scare themselves. It took them at least 15 minutes to realize they got their asses handed to them and wallets taken. In that time, I just phoned the police, gave the police officers the IDs, and they were sent off. Had to be the best Halloween I have ever had. Even better than lighting up a ton of fireworks. My dad used to make and run the haunted houses in town, so most nights I would go with him. This was common and fun for both of us. While he was working, I would hang out at the front desk or go sit in a corner somewhere in the maze. This maze was pitch black. You could not see my balls if they were draped on your face. He was the only person that knew the whole maze, so one night he got the idea to take the chainsaw guy with him to a corner. The group had to find their way out by any means possible. This was before everybody had cell phones, so that wouldn't work. They felt for everything until they felt my dad's mask. The only words I heard were, "Guys, there's something in here." At that point, the man with the chainsaw decided that now would be an enjoyable time to commence with the assisted loss of bladder control known as a chainsaw. The whole group broke a hole in the wall, plywood, and ran like mojos. Greatest night ever. They had to shut down for like an hour to get the replacement wall up. I saw 2 teenage boys dragging their large mother through graveyard dirt by their arms. All of them screaming while I chewed on her ankle while playing a graveyard zombie. I have seen bored haunted house actors chasing a tour bus of seniors with starter pistols, they fire blanks, and chains and hammers, on foot, 4 blocks. I've seen 2 actors with a motorcycle build a ramp and come leaping out of the exit of the haunted house wielding a chainsaw. They chased this one poor couple through the parking lot. The girls, sobbing and screaming, were out. "You have to stop now. Why isn't this ending?" They made donuts. Yelled yeehaw a lot. Scared the pedals out, that couple. Pooping. People crashing right through walls. Fights with them. Smoke from the chainsaw all night. Every night. But the worst. I was the butcher that night. Electric knife. Bloody apron. That sort of thing. My room ended in a long hall with an IR beam truck horn and some headlights mounted in a wall. Loud as a mojo and bright. Looks like a truck. Sounds like a truck, and in comes this dad. Just an average guy in his 40s. A little paunchy with glasses. He brought his son in. The son was way too young to be in our house. Maybe 10 or 11. This guy came through and freaked out. I raced after him hollering and swinging the electric knife around, and then he hit the truck. Boonk! I have never seen anyone shake quite like that. He grabbed his son and used him like a shield before sliding down the wall into a fetal position. At first, I didn't get how scared the guy really was and did the Woody Boogie thing, but after a bit, I realized he was frozen and gibbering. I broke character and took off the bloody apron. I tried to calm him down. His son seemed okay, but the guy was just stunned. I helped him to his feet, told him everything would be fine, and ran him through the secret doors, the quiet way out of the house. He said thanks. I felt pretty bad about that one. I am all for giving the customers their money's worth, and for pushing the line when the customers are having fun, but that really taught me to pay attention to the customer. There is a significant difference between a playful scare and real terror, and the trick is balancing in the big divide between the two. I have a pretty bad story from Halloween Horror Nights at Universal Studios Hollywood. My friends and I were on the House of 1000 Corpses maze and came up on the scene from the movie where Dr. Satan is carving into someone with a hammer or some similar tool. Anyway, the guy's role was to be working on the fake body, then at intervals jump out at the people really quickly and scare them. So, we're passing him and boom, he jumps out. But he lost grip on the hammer and it just flew out of his hand. Smack right in some big guy's head. He looked legitimately dazed for about 10 seconds, then blinked and started laughing, while poor Dr. Satan is frantically consoling him and looking more worried than I've ever seen anyone. Narrow escape, I guess. So, I was working at a haunted trail one October. We had set pieces where guests would stop and have a mini-story told/acted for them, and we also had random scares on the trail there, some screaming, some people jumping out, etc. I was at the beginning of the trail after they welcomed my visitors. My friend would roll out in front of people and pretend to be dead, they'd see her body, freak out, walk around her, and she'd appear a bit later. I would pop out as they walked by, all white with blood eyes in all black with an axe that dripped blood. The part one was on was a bit of a hill, with a chain link fence on the left side. After I spooked them, I'd run the axe on the fence and breathe heavily behind them down the hill, where a previously dead girl would jump out. So, my friend does her thing and I hear these two girls screaming bloody murder and I think, this'll be awesome. So, I wait and pop out. It's about 6 mildly drunk sorority girls. They freak the hell out. As I start creeping up behind them, one girl refuses to turn around and walk down the hill, she just keeps staring at me. Her friend decides the best thing to do is rush away from me, so she drags her friend down the hill, making the friend fall and roll down. At the bottom, my dead friend pops out once more and Tumble Girl tries her best to dash back up the hill, but creepy Axeman, me, is right there, so she just breaks down and cries. I saw her on campus the next day and she was all sorts of bruised and cut off from tumbling down the hill. Pretty wonderful time. Back in high school my friends and I thought it was hilarious to scare people at Six Flags during their Fright Fest. We were just high school punks, I look back on it ashamedly, but my friend's girlfriend was saying all night how she was going to scare someone. She finally works up the courage, sneaks up behind some woman, and in her little squeaky voice, says boo. The woman slowly, turns and we can see she is an actor dressed as a zombie. She roars so loud, and my friend's girl starts crying. It was amazing. Same Six Flags, 10 years later. My wife and I took our nephews to Fright Fest. We do the walk though and they give the kids whistles to blow to get the monsters to stop. My older nephew was 10 at the time and was acting all tough. Literally the first actor he encounters, she is dressed as a doll zombie thing, he starts rapidly firing his whistle, standing frozen still. The actor pulls out her own whistle and starts blowing it in his face. They do this at each other for about 10 seconds then he starts sprinting off, still whistling, away from us, with her chasing and whistling after him. Our whole family was crying and laughing, and my wife is yelling at me to run after him but I'm laughing so hard I can't breathe. Found him in a bush sitting next to the actor, still whistling in each other's faces. In high school I worked at Corn Maze. During the month of October, we had a separate haunted maze that was essentially a quarter-mile long path with pneumatic-powered mannequins, countless props meant to creep people out and actors of all ages, friends and family of the guys that designed it. We had drunk people come in all the time, teens, college students, the occasional group of stay-at-home spouses, etc. One night a group of couples, mid-40s maybe, came around 10 o'clock and it seemed like they had all been out to dinner that night, had a few drinks and decided to keep their babysitters at home waiting another hour or so while they enjoyed the haunted corn maze. While they're walking through the path, one of the actors, the designer's 11-year-old daughter in an old hockey goalie mask, pops out of a prop coffin and one of the men in the group freaks out and punches the little girl square in the face. The guy said it was an automatic reaction and he thought it was just another prop. The police officers got involved and after an hour or so of apologizing while the guy's wife cried in the background, the little girl finally said something like, "I'm fine. Just go home." Her dad, the designer, opted not to press charges under the condition that the guy never come back again, and the police officers let him leave. When I was in high school, my youth group would go to a haunted corn maze every year. The maze would be cut into a modern design every year celebrating something. The 2010 design was for Boy Scouts' 100th anniversary, with one side being normal and the other being haunted. One of the leaders was a police officer leading a group of students through it. One of the workers was a farmer with a shotgun that shot blanks. So, when this same worker sneaked up behind them, he let a shot off. The leader turns, aiming his gun at the worker. The farmer freaks out, drops the shotgun, and says it's a blank. They didn't have a farmer with a shotgun the next year. One of my friends does this haunted house in his house every year and attracts some people on Halloween night. My friend has an in-ground pool in which he likes to make a wooden bridge going across 8 feet deep water with a warning sign at the start of it. Here's the thing though. When at least 2 people are crossing the bridge, someone dressed as a sea monster, which would look something like this, would jump out really fast and get halfway up the bridge with a wooden ladder and scare people. To make things more unexpected, the person in the water would have a snorkel or something like one to breathe underwater, then lunge out when the time was right. Which was easy considering the mask has a movable jaw installed on it. It was my turn to do this. I was going good throughout the night. Good thing the pool was being heated before Halloween started. We also added a sickly green color to the water to give effect. Here's where things got really edgy. Around 8 p.m. during pitch black time, 2 girls, possibly around 13 or 14 years old, were about to cross the bridge. As soon as they got out into the middle, I lunged out at them. One of them got so scared she lunged back and fell over the railing. Her friend started screaming, stating she was a really bad swimmer. I tried to go after her, but one of my friends, who was hiding in the bushes observing the segment and not there to scare anyone, dived in and got her out. I was afraid of trying to get her. I would scare her much more with the costume I had on. My friend got her out of the pool. She was barely conscious. So, my friend, being a trained lifeguard, started performing CPR until she came back. She got back up and I got out of the pool saying I was sorry about what happened. She laughed and said I was just doing my job and I was good with my scare tactics. I was actually expecting her to slap me silly after what happened. I never forgot about that moment for the remainder of the night, so I turned it down a bit so the same scenario wouldn't happen again. It's just too scary to think about someone nearly getting injured while trying to get a good scare and have some fun for the night. I was a part of a fraternity/sorority haunted house for charity where sorority members would act as guides and lead groups of people through the fraternity house. Our themes would change each year, but the most memorable year for me was when we had each section/room representing a separate horror movie. Saw, The Exorcist, Poltergeist, The Shining, and Halloween were among the movies that inspired sections of the tour. As an example, the guide would open a room with people chained to the wall and the Saw theme music would be blaring and a person in a Billy the Puppet costume would ride out from behind a tarp and a recording of Jigsaw's voice would play and the chained actors would scream and cry for help as fake legs or arms got chopped off. Then the guide would lead the guests to the next room/section. My section's theme was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and my role was to hide behind a black tarp in a pitch-black hallway, flip on a strobe light, fire up and wield a chainsaw, sans chain, then sprint at the group while bellowing. I wore a Leatherface sequel mask and a trench coat and a scraggly brown wig. For the first hour of our haunted house each year we'd have a tamed-down kids hour where families would be guided through and not be exposed to as scary of an experience as later in the night. This also gave the guides a good chance to get used to the order of the rooms and better their intros and segues to each section. I thought it was probably in the best interest of all parties not to traumatize the children and stayed hidden through the first hour. Finally, it was announced that the crowd was older, and we could pull out all stops. However, the men involved refrained from telling the female guides that I was hiding and a part of the tour, so when I came bursting out with a chainsaw over my head the first time, the attendees were afraid, but they were mentally prepared to be scared. The guides were definitely not ready for the ambush and gave out blood-curdling screams and took off running out of legitimate fear. As you can imagine, that really freaked out the attendees and sent them into pandemonium when their guide took off out of fright. I only worked at a haunted house one night in order to help a friend, and it was definitely an eventful one. One of the guys that my friend and I were scared of peed his pants. Another guy got so angry at me because I wouldn't tell him how to get out of a haunted maze that he threatened me. His girlfriend then got mad at him that he would threaten a girl just because he was scared, and he started crying uncontrollably. I'm almost positive that she broke up with him on the spot. Definitely an interesting night. Fortunately, I did not witness this one, but only heard about it. One of the rooms in the house was a mad scientist room. The scientist guy in the room acted crazy and waved around a huge cow tongue at the crowd while talking about what he would do with their organs. They didn't get a fresh tongue every night. It might be a week or 3 old before it starts grossing out the workers and had to get a new one. One night a group of drunk frat guys comes and goes through the house. One of them grabbed the around 3-week-old tongue and took a bite out of it. Even now, years later and getting the story secondhand, I still get grossed out over it. Why Dad used to do Freddy Krueger at the local fire department HH. It was always great. Once, he spotted a couple holding hands and walking down this dark hallway. The man sees him and my dad motions him away. My dad takes the woman's hand, and amazingly, she is talking and doesn't notice. They come to the end of the hall and as Count Dracula steps out and startles the woman, she turns to her boyfriend, "No wait, Freddy." Many screams were heard. That HH was the best. Smiley face. I worked at one when I was in high school. Basically, how the scene played out was there an inbred hillbilly cannibal sitting in a lawn chair screaming at our guests. He would say a cue, then a zombie would pounce from behind the chair and eat him. While the guests were distracted with that, someone would pull a drop window and further terrify them. I was the guy with the drop window. We got a call on the employee walkie-talkie system that there was a kid who wasn't taking the whole experience well and we should tone it down a little bit when he comes through. My adolescent brain registered this with the kid as much as possible. The kid comes through, visibly shaken with dried tears in his eyes. My colleagues do their zombie/cannibal thing, and the kid starts flipping out. Now's my chance. I drop the window, get right into his face and scream, "I'm going to kill your parents." The kid's scared while letting out the most horrifying scream I've ever heard in my life. Think Emily Rose is having a really bad trip. Even worse, I was in charge of the air cannon, so when his friends pulled him out into the nearby hallway, I gave him a few bursts of that. Apparently he collapsed in the next room and the higher-ups had to carry his stained body out of the house. I had a nice chew-out session with my boss after that one. I used to hate the guys who were arrogant like they had to pay money to come to an entertainment venue just to prove that nothing could scare them. Totally overcompensating, so they were my targets. I have the creepiest blue eyes ever, not in a jar, in real life. They are pretty in normal light but crazy in black lightning. So, I would get up extremely close to a target, make eye contact and just sing a very monotone la-la while slowly following them. The guy usually got a "hey, look, your girlfriend" joke from his friends, but they were all pretty freaked out when I was still right there 5 minutes later. Another night I would be a plant in a crowd coming through from the start, sweatshirt, jeans, normal. About halfway through the trail an actor dressed as Jason in our room would grab me out of the crowd and throw me against a cardboard wall, stage combat, we blocked it all beforehand. I'm freaking the hell out the whole time, but not nearly as much as the rest of the group that I was with. We had a haunted house in high school to raise money. It was in an abandoned house and at the end we had a slice and steps. You could slide or walk down the steps. Well, this rather overweight woman decided she'd try the slide. She got stuck around one of the twists in the slide and started panicking. She was screaming and hollering and those waiting in line to get in at the other side of the building just thought it was part of the haunted house. Eventually, the fire department showed up and got her out of the slide. Needless to say, that was our last slide on a haunted house. About 2 years ago there was this guy who tried to scare the actors. I was dressed as a psycho-infected doctor and all of a sudden this man runs through my room. I played my part and then he went. A few minutes later I noticed him standing at the end of my room. I approach him in character telling him to move on through the other rooms, no response. He was wielding 2 hatchets. He then laughed maniacally and ran from my haunt to the other haunts. There were 6 different themed haunts in the whole building, trying to scare us. We were not sure what he was going to do so we called security. They couldn't find the guy because he ended up hiding in one of the haunts. They later found the guy and it turns out he was high on coke, and he had the intention to harm us. Glad we got him when we could. I was figuring I would see more personal stories. I am seeing a lot of my friends' stories. I have a couple since haunted house was my first job. I worked at one around the time Scream was out. So those masks were everywhere. I just happened to get assigned that costume, and I loved it. The setup I worked on most days was a graveyard with hands peeking out of the ground and moving to hold people's attention. Everyone would walk by watching the graves expecting something jumping out from behind a headstone or a partially open coffin on the left. But the real surprise was the blank wall concealed me standing in my Scream costume on their right. I was told to just pop my head out as groups passed by or put my hand out and make a quick sharp noise to startle. Then they would run through the rest and continue on into pitch black hall with a 90-degree turn that they had to feel their way through. Well, I got bored with just popping my head out. So, I started timing it out and seeing what I could get away with, trying to integrate myself with the groups passing through. I got pretty silent about slipping in with a group passing through so that I could be standing in the middle of them before they knew I was even there. Well, this black family was passing through, and the mother was saying, "I know that coffin has a person in it, I can see them looking, you should just come out, I know you in there." There wasn't anyone in there. I slipped unnoticed into their huddle, and just started casually walking with them. I made it through the whole graveyard with them. One of the teenagers actually grabbed my arm preparing for the scare from the graveyard. Which freaked me out because I was told that if I touch anyone I will be fired. We were all staring at the graveyard and about to make it into the pitch black hall with a turn and they started saying things like "Test, that room wasn't scary, just some stupid little hands in a graveyard? That ant is scary. Now we are just going into another room, this ant is scary." At which point I said, "Can you guys see anything in there?" This is when they started to realize that I was literally standing in the middle of them, and the mother looks at me and screams and sprints faster than I would have guessed a woman her size could. Straight into a pitch black hall. It would all be fine except there was a turn, and I heard her smack directly into the wall in front of her. She kept screaming, "My nose, I broke my nose." So, I pulled my mask off, broke out my flashlight, and found her holding her nose as it was dripping copious amounts of blood. I jumped over one of the fake walls, grabbed a supervisor, and blocked people while they escorted her out. She got refunded and I got no reprimand. Apparently she was pretty pissed. Another story, while I was behind my fake wall, I would get bored, and occasionally climb up and watch people pass through the chainsaw room which I backed up to. I would have a bird's eye view of the scariest room for some people. This one group was going through, and I noticed that this short girl with Coke bottle glasses was extra skittish, so I made a note to watch her reaction to the chainsaw room. Sure, enough I was right to want to watch that one. She was there with a taller couple. I heard her coming into the last room, so I climbed to my perch. The scene is an operating table with a fake corpse on it mangled. The scare is when the group gets in the room. Guy with a burlap mask kicks a door open and starts a chainsaw and revs it a whole bunch. People scream and run to the exit. This poor girl was losing it before she got into the room. I hear her going on about how she just wants out, she is in near meltdown mode. The couple she is going with are just holding hands tightly. She pushes her way forward seeing the emergency red exit sign. She starts to evaluate the situation and looks at the gruesome display, then the exit sign back to the gruesome display. Then the kick and chainsaw came in, and instead of running for the exit like I thought she would, she turned 180 and sprinted backwards at her friends who stepped apart but didn't release their hands in time. I watch helplessly as her face makes directly interlocked hands. Like Red Rover if you ever played that in school. I watch her get clotheslined and see her glasses go soaring off her face landing on the opposite side of gruesome mangled body. She sits cross-legged repeatedly screaming my glasses over and over at an interval that I know she can't keep up without passing out. I am panicked at this point. Burlap Head couldn't see the couple are fumbling around trying to find glasses for their now useless screaming friend, and I know they are frigid if we were playing hot or colder. I try to help yelling down they are on the other side of the dead body without thinking about the fact that I am in a full costume hovering above them. This is enough to send them over the top in full flight mode, leaving their screaming friend to fend for herself. She is now hyperventilating and sobbing uncontrollably, still cross-legged in the middle of the floor. I am yelling directions at Burlap Head to find her glasses. He finally does. I try to shine my flashlight down to make it a little better, knowing that Burlap Head does not have a flashlight since his hands are full. It was pretty interesting. I know the look on a person's face when they decide to give up on someone and abandon them. I think that the most annoying thing working at a haunted house was the brothers that would come through in packs and just say the whole time, "This isn't scary, this is so dumb," and "they can't touch you," and occasionally push some workers around. I don't understand why they would pay money to be all brave for their friends. It is a haunted house, you are supposed to get yourself all psyched out for it. If you are going to be a big brave man, at least bring a girl with you so you are working on impressing someone. The best thing you can do for your experience, use your friend's first name loudly and when you think someone can overhear it. That it was easily my favorite thing to give. WTF, if I hear someone's first name I will make a mental note and work extra hard and make sure I use their first name and address them directly. Usually makes it more intense. I have seen people get so upset over it too. It makes it very personal and very creepy. Family story here. My mom is really easy to scare, and when my parents were dating, my dad took her to a haunted house. There was a group of people they were following, and the two of them were at the very end. So, they're going through this haunted house, and one of the roaming actors keeps doubling back to scare my mom, since she reacts loudly every time. The last time he comes up from behind, and my dad spots him first. Being the last person in the line, and knowing that no one else saw the guy, my dad signals the guy to come over quietly, and when he does, my dad switched his hand, which my mom had been holding, with the worker's hand, and then stops walking. She walked along for about 5 minutes holding the hand of this worker as my dad walked behind the group, until something scared her enough that she turned to my dad for, I guess, protection. Turned around to find that actor staring her in the face. When I was about 5 I went through a haunted house. I was dressed as a princess, and I put my pretty necklace on my forehead like a crown. There was a room where people were reaching through the wall and grabbing people as they walked by. One of the workers snatched the necklace right off my head and the hand disappeared. I started yelling and screaming for them to give it back, but my dad thought I was terrified and rushed me out. Once we were out and I told him what happened, the look of pure anger on his face, like who would do that to a little girl? Well, he went back in through the exit and was gone for a really long time. I mean like half an hour. Eventually he came out with my necklace. He told me it was an accident, but the look he gave my mom said otherwise. Of course, I knew it was no accident. Nevertheless, my dad was a hero that day. I was a member of the PTA for my local grade school. We would have a pretty tame haunted house. As I also directed traffic in front of the school in the morning, I decided to be a dead traffic guard who pops out of his open coffin. I made a nice coffin, got my safety vest and whistle, and laid down inside it with a sign "RU end over." Now I did scare the bejesus out of a couple of little kids, sorry. I am really sorry. But the funny thing was how many kids hit me in the stomach, no nut jabs, thankfully, pinched my nose closed, or gave me some of their candy, poor Mr. Pombrio. I worked in one for a couple of years, best job ever, I might add. I was to stand in a corner that was hollowed out a bit, the walkways are pretty narrow and someone standing there would be obvious. I was dressed in a fursuit and matte black face makeup, had a beard at the time, so it absorbed the light pretty well. Just before me was my buddy in a little room pretending to be an animatronic until the people weren't as on guard, then he would spring to life and scared. And just after him was a strobe light to blind the people before they got to me. Basically, all I had to do was wait till they were a little past and jump out and grab them a little while roaring. Well, a small group goes through, and gets scared bad by my friend when they get to me. The mom, I assume, must have had her eyes shut through the strobe and noticed me. She made a note, "Hey, there is someone standing here," But since there are also mannequins and other things all over, she reaches out and grabs me. At first it was just my chest/stomach, then she felt my beard, convinced I was a person. She then grabs my crotch and says, "Yep, this is a person, let's keep moving." The hallway is pitch black and has like 2 corners, not counting mine. I can hear the group moving on, but she still has her hands on my junk. I hear her mumble something and walk off. This was definitely the strangest thing I have witnessed. I also once scared a little kid so badly he all through the hallway to the next scare station. I am currently in my 5th year working at a haunt in Michigan. I have been punched, kicked, bit, spit on, and verbally abused. People come through drunk or high or both a lot. All that pales in comparison to the lows people are willing to sink to. It was a busy night 2 years ago. The place I work has both a haunted forest and a haunted house. The house has 2 floors, upstairs has a theme, the basement is a chaotic maze. I work in the house on the top floor. We had a particularly surly group go through. Typical douchebags, nothing new. They get to the basement and have a slight altercation with one of the guys who works in the basement. They had pushed him, and he had fallen down. He was okay, but after the group left, a foul odor started to waft up from the depths of the maze. We went downstairs to try and figure out where the smell was coming from. Turns out the group had brought in a plastic bag full of feces and had thrown it all over the basement. This wasn't your average log/solid state consistency either. It was a horrible, off-color, liquid mess that was almost impossible to clean up entirely. The worst part was the poor man who got shoved by them fell right into the worst of it. So, for the rest of the night this guy was wandering around smeared in feces and the house reeked. We shut down for half an hour while we cleaned it up. Talk about gross. It ended up being a bad night. Here's the best thing I've witnessed so far. Just last night actually something beautiful happened. In my spot in the house I'm a victim, tied down to a bed, and when the customers come into the room I'm crying and begging for them to untie me, and when they get close enough they trigger insanely loud metal music and a strobe and a demented zombie jumps up onto the bed and usually scares the piss out of everyone. Well, these 3 obviously drunk guys come in and I start with my act, but they're being total pricks and start making jokes towards me. I think the actor that's behind the bed is going to pull out his flashlight and tell them to cut it or something, but instead he immediately goes for the scare without the strobes or the music. The 3 guys are really taken off guard and they start tripping and stumbling towards the exit in their drunken state with a look of pure terror in their eyes. You get sick of those kinds of persons, so to see them scared is always nice, smiley face. I used to volunteer at a haunted house complex as a creepy Victorine's girl equipped with bloody stuffed bunny and meat cleaver, mostly because I was petite with a creepy giggle. I worked in the main house as well as our pitch black maze, so I have a few good stories. The best was one time I was sitting in a dark corner of an exceptionally large room on a rocking chair singing nursery rhyme to myself when a woman walks in with her little boy in front of her. I waited until they passed me, and I came up directly behind her and whispered to her, "Will you be my mommy?" She shrieks at them, committed all over her son. The poor kid started crying and the mom was freaking out. Thankfully we were close to an emergency guest is losing it exit and I got them out of there, but I'm 90% that kid is traumatized. A few years ago, I worked at a haunted house near my parents'. I was assigned to the electric chair, which was located at the end of a pitch black hallway. My tactic was to listen to people coming down the hallway, usually pretty slowly, being pitch black and all, and then flip the switch on the chair which activated the strobe light and buzzing sound, and scream at them as loud as I could. So, we're having a pretty normal night, and I hear a large group of people coming. There's this one swigged swag bro type who I hear stomping down the hallway. "You guys are wimps, this house isn't even scary, this is so lame," etc. I got ready to scare the babiris out of him. I waited until he practically ran into me before I flipped the switch, and screamed at him as loud as I could. He shrieked like a little girl and ran back down the hallway to everyone else. I had to turn my laughter into more screams, because I was about to lose it. One time my family went to a haunted trail type of thing, I can't remember what it's called. You ride in a wagon for a bit while being scared every once in a while by zombies, then get out and walk in a field where you get scared by other stuff, and when we went through the walking section there were these guys with chainsaws, but the chainsaws had no blade. My older sister fell behind us a bit and the guys with chainsaws sort of crowded her and pretended to cut her with them. We heard her screaming and she's not one to scream unless something was actually wrong, so we turned back to see her crying on the ground with the guys around her. Apparently, the chainsaws touched some of her bare skin and burned her pretty bad. It was still spinning even without blades or something, and the guys didn't realize she was actually hurt rather than scared. Needless to say, they got in serious trouble with the organizers of the place, and it kind of ruined the fun for us. It was really scary for me too, because I looked up to my sister a lot back then. I was only a kid, and it really freaks me out whenever that cool mask of hers breaks. I was a creepy jester covered in blood and carrying a huge knife at a haunted forest attraction. One night I decided to go scare the people in line before they came in and see one of my friends that I know is deathly afraid of clowns in line. Seeing this as an opportunity to get a quick laugh, I sneak up behind her and stand silently until someone tells her to turn around. This is when it hits the fan. She jumps and screams, as expected, but she also punched me so hard in the face she broke my nose. Now in immense pain I go to take off my mask, but she's still screaming and starts to run. She ends up tripping and knocking herself out and breaking her ankle. She still hasn't forgiven me almost 2 years later. This particular incident involved a celebrity. I wouldn't want to mention names, so let's just call him Son James. Word got through the maze that Mr. Jamos had just entered, and our supervisors were offering prizes for anyone who could get the best scare. I was positioned in a narrow hallway that had 3 doorless rooms on either side. In this hallway, every 45 seconds, there was an intense high-speed strobe light that activated for 5 seconds. I waited and counted for the perfect moment, skipping perfectly good potential scares in hopes that the timing of the strobe would align with Mr. Jamos' entrance. By the grace of God, it did. He entered the hallway with his wife, the beautiful Rebecca Rebecca Romjean, wrapped around his arm. At the other end of the hallway I stood with a plexiglass mask drenched in blood. Right then, the strobe went off and I went full speed forward. To him it must have seemed like I was rapidly barreling at him without ever seeing me take a step. And all I could see were snapshots of a man growing relatively in size and panic. Until POW. I ran headfirst into poor Rebecca, knocking us both to the ground. What I thought was a gross miscalculation in proximity by me ended up being Mr. Jamos shamelessly throwing his wife down the hallway at me like some sort of gel repellent. Well, it worked. I did end up getting that prize, also. Food voucher $5. There was this old funeral home that had been converted into a haunted house, and this one time someone came out of a casket and scared this poor large African American woman so much she ran through the wall into the lobby and out the door. Yes, I said through the wall. Straight up, I'm the juggernaut, bitch, and went through it. It was literally like something from Looney Tunes. The funeral home was really old and needed little cosmetics for Halloween, and the walls were made out of old sheetrock. They said she was screaming, "Oh Jesus, help me," in the parking lot as she got into her car. It was so funny, all the workers just stopped and laughed their heads off, as well as the rest of the people in line. It was one of the best Halloweens ever. For a few years, I was a scared actor in my family's haunted attraction in Hawaii. It's an entire plantation village located in the rough town of Waipahu. For locals on Oahu, Waipahu is known for some of the most rough around the edges youth and young adults. The entire attraction was tough for me to work on because I am already a weak person when it comes to anything remotely scary. It didn't help that this plantation village I would be working in the dark has a history of supernatural events and creepy folklore. As for the worst things I've ever witnessed, there were objects that would catch my peripherals of people walking past vacant homes on this plantation. I've even directly looked at windows in which their curtains would sway, yet there are no windows or doors open in these homes. There were multiple accounts of other actors hearing the same children's noise from certain spots within that village. To go back to those rough around the edges kids that live in that town aforementioned, it's not a clever idea to go all out on them dressed in high-dollar clown prosthetic because you'll get knocked the F out. Learned my lesson. That was about 5 years ago, and haven't had the guts to scare my family and friends again. But they are still going strong with the event. In fact, it's become one of the nation's scariest attractions and easily Hawaii's best go-to thing for the Halloween month. YouTube Hawaii's Haunted Plantation. It's pretty sweet. I work at a haunted house. A few of the many stories, having someone lose control of their bodily functions is so commonplace that we actually keep account of it on a board in the cast room. We've had 6 letters so far this year. Also, having people freak out and have a panic attack happens so often that we have EMS on staff at all times. Last year I had a girl get scared of me and turn around and run face first into a wall, breaking her nose. Another reason for the EMS on staff. One year we had a local football team come through and get so scared by the chainsaws that they ran through a wall, and we had to stop the haunt to fix it. Last weekend we had a woman get so scared that she ran off and left her kids, who were about 6 or 7. The kids just cried and stared at the monster in the room. The bro who's going through the haunt talking about how this and he isn't scared is usually the first one to push his girlfriend in front of him. Also, if you pay to come through, we will scare you. If you pay to bring your 5-year-old through and then tell me not to scare him because he's young, I'm going to scare him even more. Don't bring a child to a haunted house. Went to a haunted house one time, they were going in set group sizes, I think it was 6. Anyway, I went with my girlfriend. This haunted house was extremely dark, I never really got scared, just heard the actors, and stumbled around the place feeling my way out. My girlfriend grabbed my hand after a while instead of holding onto my shoulder. When we finally got outside we discovered that me and another guy had swapped girlfriends in the dark. We got a good laugh, but that haunted house needed to figure out some lighting. There was a part of the haunted house where I was in shackles that were above my head. The gag was that the chain that went into the wall was quite long and could expand so I could run straight at the guests, and then the chain would retract back into the wall to be hidden again. The shackles around my wrist were big enough to slip in and out of, but barely. Unfortunately, this was in the basement of the house, which has gravel on the floor. 3 punkers teenagers started picking up rocks and pelting them at me. In trying to dodge, I couldn't pull my hands out of the shackles very quickly. I just started yelling security at the top of my lungs until one of my coworkers came and helped me out. I was dressed as a zombie once in a haunted house. It was at a friend's house, her mom did it every year and it was half inside, half outside. I was in a graveyard doing zombie things, and a little kid looked at me and giggled like he was having fun. I proceeded to chase him and increase my speed by about 10 minutes until I'm full speed running, and this 8-year-old kid, and he hides behind his mom. I screamed that she couldn't save him, and he just collapsed and started crying and pied himself. In one of our for charity spook houses, there was a typical chainsaw room where the guy would have a sawed-on body on a table and be hidden in the shadows waiting for each group to come by, and about the time they get a good look at the body he fires up the chainsaw, without a chain obviously, and scares the bados out of the group. Well, this particular time there was a guy about 40 looking over the body when the guy fired up the chainsaw. The problem was when he fired up the saw, the vibrating bar catch the guy on the inside of his upper thigh region, which caused the guy to take off at a dead run and go through about 3 or 4 wood frame and black plastic walls. We had to temporarily shut down for repairs. I worked in an outdoor part of a major theme park. The guests were allowed to freely roam through the area. The place was supposed to be modeled after a cemetery, and had all kinds of burlap, stringy material hung everywhere. Well, some douche thought it would be funny to pull out his lighter and burn the stuff. I have never seen a fire go from barely noticeable to, oh my god, we're all going to die, in such a short amount of time. No one was hurt, but man, that was scary. I guess you could say it was the hottest attraction that year. I did a dorm haunted house all my college years. Every year except the last, I was the helpless tied-up girl getting tortured. This was me, of course, because a dorm haunted house can't afford enough rope to do a remotely realistic yet fake tie, so the victim had to be really tied up, and I was the only one who was comfortable being tied up for 4 hours at a time plus practice. I saw a lot of weird stuff because people tended to get more distressed than surprised in my area. I made many people cry like babies. I particularly remember a rather tall guy just looking at me in horror and shrinking back during the torture scene. It was that I've seen things look. When I was in high school, I worked at a haunted house during the fall, and I was the scary clown hiding in the corner. I was told that I was to jump out once someone turned the corner, and we did this by using a hole in the wall to see. Tonight, I saw a group of people, but one was on crutches, and as I looked closer, he only had one leg. As they turn the corner, I jump out and scare them, and the guy with one leg drops his crutches and hobbles back terrified, only to fall on him as the rest of the group laughs their collective asses off, and I'm doing my best not to. The funniest part about it is when I told my boss at the end of the night, that same guy was bragging that he's never been scared at a haunted house before. I worked in a haunt about 4 years ago. There was one night that we had to send 3 of our actors to the hospital because guests tended to punch. Sometimes they do it because they're genuinely scared and it's a reflex. However, it's happened a few times where people react to the actor, pause, and then punch. That's not okay. They get kicked out. There was also an actor in our maze who was in his early 20s and was always hitting on, and even getting the numbers of, young teenage girls. Creeps. There was another guy who ate the props. I worked in an interesting place. I helped with this haunt once. One of the other guys working it had just slaughtered a cow, so he brought the guts and head to the haunt. I was carrying a chainsaw with no chain, and my friend had zipped up his jacket with the guts inside. When the kids showed up, I acted like I cut him open, and the guts spilled out. It actually looked fairly real. My friend was a good actor, but one of the kids runs up to me and yells, "Me next." Me next. It takes a brave kid to run up to someone holding a running chainsaw, chain or no chain. In middle school, me and my younger brother volunteered at a haunted forest. Our jobs were to lie in a pile of leaves on the side of the trail and jump out and scare people. This was our second night doing it, and I do have to admit it was a blast. Well, we are laying there in wait for the next group, and the guy dressed as a Native American, who would sit at the teepee about 50 feet from us, asked if I would jump out at people at the teepee so he could go to the bathroom. Well, about 5 minutes later, this monster of a woman, had to be at least 350 pounds, comes waddling up on crutches, and my brother jumps out of the leaves. He scared her so bad she stumbles and falls right on top of him. This woman rolls off of him and my brother just takes off. We couldn't find him till the end of the night. Turns out this ham beast of a lady broke his collarbone. Made fun of him for years about it. In fact, I still bring it up every once in a while to tease him. I've never worked at a haunted house, but one time, when I was in about 7th grade with 3 of my guy friends, we went to this haunted house. We waited in line for a while and we finally got in. This cute blonde girl comes up and asks me if she can go with us because she lost her group, being 6th grade boys. We obviously said yes. About 5 minutes of scares later, a huge man dressed as a monster sprint up behind us and throw her over his shoulder and continues running into the haunted maze. It was the most frightening thing until I realized she worked there. We never saw her again. I don't work at a haunted house, but I do have a funny story. My first time in one, there was a haunted bathroom that I had to walk through, and there was a guy dressed in a bloody soldier outfit. Kind of weird setup for a haunted house, but whatever. Anyway, when I walked in, he was just standing there. He looked at me slowly and just said, "Hey." I just looked at him trying to decide if I was supposed to be scared or not, so I said hi back and casually walked by him to the next room. The best experience I've had at a haunted house. Last year we went with some friends and my 17-year-old son. They had tarps hung to make a tented maze. We were wearing 3D glasses and the tarps were black with colors that glow under black lights. You had to hold your hands out and try to find the fake doors to get through. Every now and then you ended up in a dead-end room, and usually there was an actor there to scare you. One female actor who was painted the same as the walls was standing camouflaged, and my son with his hands in front got a double grope. Instantly he is mortified and starts awkwardly saying he is sorry over and over again. The girl broke character to comfort him. 3rd grade, 9 years old. Was in my elementary school's haunted house. I was in a Jason mask scaring people from inside a cardboard jail cell made out of a refrigerator box. The box had a small exit in the back which was difficult to get in and out of. I.e., no escape. Having the time of my young life scares people. When some teenagers come into my area. One fine young man decides he wants to see who is behind the mask. Being a consummate professional, I don't want to break character. The gentleman reaches through my cardboard bars and attempts to pull my mask off. I defend my anonymity by pushing his hands away. In the process, I apparently hit him in the eye. Or so he claims. He uses this as an excuse to rip out the bars and beat the unholy hell out of my 9-year-old self. I have nowhere to run, I just stand there trying to protect myself as he lands punch after punch. The practicing pugilist, eventually tired of destroying my view of a fair and just world, moved on to harass other monsters, leaving me a bloody heap at the bottom of a refrigerator box that had become my cell. The haunted house was shut down after that. The young man got away without anyone finding out his name. I want to be the bigger man here, forgive and forget. But even at 33, I hope that he is living every day in serious horrible pain. I'm sure it is mostly not knowing who he is. I would probably feel different if I met him today and he was sorry for his actions. I worked at a haunted corn maze when I was 16. I hid behind a corner and would just jump out and scream when I heard footsteps. The maze is in the middle of nowhere, and since screams/noise seemed to echo, it was hard to know which direction they were coming from. I heard footsteps coming and so I jumped out. It turned out to be a father who had brought his 2 or 3-year-old to the maze. The toddler was already crying from an earlier scare, but I couldn't tell which direction the cries were coming from. He pushed me against the corn and choked me. He screamed in my face and asked me why I would try and scare them if I knew they were already scared. I was traumatized and had to walk out. Sadly, as I'm reading these, I realize I'm one of these stories. I'm about 6 feet 2 inches, and one year, there was a strobe light room in a haunted house I was in. I had just gotten scared and disoriented in it, and made my way to a small corridor with a fence far in the front. There was a little girl in front of me, like maybe 7, I don't know why she was in this thing. Between her and I was my friend, just as tall as me. So, a guy starts revving a chainsaw behind the fence, and we're all focused on him, when another guy comes directly behind me and revs one. I pushed my friend over the girl, through a fake wall, out into the theme park, and I ran until I was in another part of the park. I worked in a haunted house a few years back. It wasn't the most organized affair, but whatever. Some punk punched me in the face for scaring him. Let it be known I was a 5 feet 2 inches 110 pounds soaking wet type of girl. That type of behavior is not tolerated, and he was escorted out of the building. If you're the type of person who punches at things if they get scared, stay out of haunted houses, okay? I volunteered at a haunted house for one season and only in one room of the house. I was dressed as a vampire and stood in a coffin until a group entered my room. Then, I would push a switch and slowly walk forward while a mirror trick would make it appear as if I transformed into a bat. Then I would pull a rope and let this large fake bat slam across the cage right in front of the group. I had to wait until I got a verbal cue before starting this string of events, however, or the sequence would be off, and the group would see the bat slam, but nothing else. That would be lame and not scary. I was really frustrated one night when the mirror trick started going off without me pushing the button. I let a technician know and he came out about 3 times to fix it. The final time, this burly tech looked spooky. He said, "Look, I know you're new here, but have you heard about Larry?" He then proceeded to tell me about Larry, one of the original designers of the haunted house about 10 years ago who died in a car accident on opening night. He had designed this particular attraction, he told me. I thought, this guy is scaring me and trying to scare the new girl. Yet, as the nights wore on and this continued to happen at random times, I became increasingly spooked. One night, I said aloud, "Okay, Larry, do you think you could leave this alone? I'm getting annoyed." And it stopped. It didn't happen again for me the rest of the season, but it would happen for the other actors who switched with me and worked in my place. We scared a woman into labor. It was a bit early. In her big coat and in the dark we didn't know she was pregnant. The baby was okay. A boy. They sent us a card. Ha ha. We scared a man to the point of actually pooping himself. A grown man. There was some debate on whether he was in war. Different. Though. We used to count people we got to pee themselves as a cause for celebration. We kept track by counting the puddles. Which leads me to my absolute favorite, a victory I can claim as my own. I scared a teenage girl so bad she grabbed her friend as she collapsed to the floor, dragging her friend down with her. As I came at them she climbed over/on her friend, then she peed on her friend. It was glorious. At least for me. I imagine the girl and her friend disagree. I had a woman tell me she'd had nightmares about me since she saw me the year before. That was one of the best compliments I've ever gotten. Ha ha. I've had guys throw their girlfriends at me and run. So maybe caused a few breakups? About 10 years ago, a few friends and I set up a haunted house in my friend Sean's garage. We had curtains on either side with holes so we could reach out and grab people, body parts hanging from the ceiling, good lighting, and a smoke machine. The main focus point was the guy sitting in the middle with a full-body hooded cloak, a mask, straw coming out of his sleeves, and a bowl of candy in his lap. If kids wanted candy, they had to walk into the garage and get it themselves from the bowl in the lap of what they assumed was just a fake scarecrow. But, when they get there it's really our friend and he jump and they get a cheap scare and laughs all around by parents, etc. However, this wasn't the real scare, as Sean's garage had a large section for shelves and tools built into the back of the garage that we had placed a sheet over that mimics the sheets on the walls of the garage, holes, blood slashes, etc. Behind the sheet Sean was wearing the most realistic Texas Chainsaw Massacre Leatherface mask with fake hair, same clothes as Leatherface, a bloody smock, boots, and a gas-powered chainsaw that smoked and sounded gnarly which we had purchased on eBay and removed the chain from. I would clear it with the parents as the kid walked into the garage letting them know it was genuinely terrifying, and once we got the okay and the kid had gotten their cheap scare from the guy with the candy bowl, I would give Sean permission. First, he would flick on the floodlight he had behind him so all you could see was his silhouette through the sheet, and then he would begin starting the chainsaw. It was so loud in that garage I can't even begin to tell you the terror on these kids' faces when Sean would fly from behind that backlit curtain, chainsaw over his head running full speed at them. Nothing bad happened, I just wanted to share our cool Halloween experience. I was working at a rather large, haunted attraction and we had several tents that housed the various parts. It was an extremely windy day which made me really nervous because the main tent was huge and was swaying pretty badly. I was fortunately able to work on the actors from a moderate distance away from the tent. At one point, they decided to tighten straps that were, I assume, holding the tent to the poles. I watched as a metal buckle on the end of a strap suddenly went airborne, knocked one of the guys in the face, and then hit the metal pole and sparked from the force. Oh, the sound the guy made! It had knocked his front tooth out. I noticed quite a change in the paperwork we had to sign the following year. Worked at a large theme park as a bearded lady in a circus freak themed area. I am already a well-endowed female, but they put me in a fat suit, turning my chest into a comically large monstrosity. Most people noticed the chest before the beard, haha. They somehow were able to match the beard almost perfectly with my natural hair, so it looked amazingly realistic. Anyway, I wasn't a really scary character. I was a good distracting character, so I would often set up scares for the others. One time, I was setting up the scare, flaunting the comically large chest, telling the lady she should have a man who grows a beard as fine as mine, etc., and all of a sudden we hear this blood-curdling scream. Normal for this park, but there was something different about it. I break character and turn around and some Nortenya is beating out of one of our female clowns because she scared him. Our male clowns are pulling the man off her and I run for security. Long story short, she had a fractured nose and a black eye and couldn't work up the courage to finish the season with us. Guys, all I ask as a performer at one of these attractions, keep your hands to yourself. If your first reaction to getting scared is to hit, do not pay $45 to come to a haunted attraction. Also, the female actors do not appreciate your physical assault of our breasts. Can't tell you how many times my fake foam breasts were squeezed and pulled on. If they had been my real breasts, I would have bags of bruises hanging off my chest. I did light for a haunted house at my high school a few years ago. Kids from the school volunteered to hide in places and jump out or just be spooky looking. One of the kids was supposed to jump up from behind a window and pound on it as people walked by, but I guess after a few hours the frames got weak and the entire window shattered. The poor kid had shards of glass sticking straight out of his hands. Scared the people though. I work on a haunted farm that's out in the sticks. It has a haunted hayride, a corn maze, and a haunted barn/maze type thing. In order to get to all three events you have to pay $27, so this isn't a cheap event. Opening night, this drunk group of rednecks comes through, and after making themselves at the first two events, one of them decided to just coldcock one of the actors in the face at the final event. Security instantly kicked them out and banned them for life. There were a number of plastic windows in the house I was working in. When a group walked by me, decided I would hit the edge of the window pane and scare them. Missed the edge, hit the middle of the pane, and immediately felt a lot of pain. It sliced my fingers open. Everyone in the hallway thought it was part of the house though. Had to get it bandaged up, decided to act like I had been disarmed the rest of the night. Another time we scared this one poor girl so badly that she broke down in a sobbing fit in the corner of the room. We had to turn all the lights on to get her out of there. I was behind a painting that is a drop-down door. This group of 3 people walked through the hallway, and I dropped off the painting and yelled at them. The tall skinny man in the middle of a girl and another guy freaked out. He yelled, "OH," while jerking backwards and slamming his head on the wall. This poor guy's glasses fly off of his face and he scrambles and picks them up and just takes off down the hallway at a full-on sprint. I was stuck there with his 2 friends and the 3 of us were just laughing. The first time was when I was younger, let's say 11 or 12. I really wanted to go to this haunted house attraction near my house, and my parents continually tried to talk to me out of it. Eventually they succumbed to my begging and let me go. In line the whole time, I was pumped. I couldn't wait to get in there and be all brave. We went in, a guy jumped out at me, I screamed and kicked him in the balls and sprinted through the rest of it, leaving my parents behind. Another time was more recently, actually happened this past May. Me and a group of friends were down in Wildwood, New Jersey for this big indoor colored guard competition. I helped with the mats and props, one of these friends being my now ex-girlfriend. The breakup had nothing to do with this, One of my best friends insisted that we all had to go through this thing called the ghost ship on the boardwalk, which I knew was going to be a haunted house kind of thing, but I thought I was manly enough for it at this point. I was wrong. I went behind my aforementioned friend, and after the first jump scare I proceeded to grasp the hood of his sweatshirt with all my might, screaming obscenities at the top of my lungs the entire time. We were part of a large group of people from the guard and such, and I didn't even care. I wanted out. Then after I got out alive, my ex-girlfriend asked me to go on with her. And I couldn't say no. When we came out, her hand was almost purple from me squeezing it so hard, and she was laughing. Yeah, I didn't like the ghost ship too much. This reminded me of a traumatizing experience from my youth, curious if anyone else ever witnessed or experienced this. I went on a haunted house tour with my mom. It started out not very scary, but as it progressed it became quite terrifying. By the end of it she was screaming her head off, I was as well, and trying to ward off workers with a flashlight, which wasn't allowed. I don't know why they didn't take it from her, though she didn't strike anyone. In one of the last rooms, some guy jumps out with a chainsaw, and she takes me by my arms and shoved me in front of her like a human shield. One of the moments when I realized how organically selfish she is. It really hurt. I thought parents were instinctually supposed to protect their children. Not always the case. When I was in high school, a bunch of us volunteered to work at the haunted house that our school put on every year. It was one of those typical maze-style haunted houses with interesting things happening in each classroom. People would sign up, and if their ideas were approved, they would get assigned a spot and have a part in the haunted house. Most of the time, they were pretty lame and not scary, but the one year we did it, we made up something awesome. So, we managed to get a spot in the lunchroom. To be specific, we got our spot in the kitchen. We had set up one of those white drape sheets hanging from the ceiling. The type they use in a medical environment to make makeshift rooms when they have no walls, so we hung up this sheet and stood behind it so that no one could see us except for shadows made by a light shining onto it from behind. We had covered spots of it in fake blood, so it looked pretty creepy. We would have our friend, really hot chick in a bloody nurse's outfit, hold up the groups for a bit so we could do our act. We had a table set up and one of our friends lay on it. Another guy was the doctor and there was a surgeon as well. Basically, the doctor would say that limb had to be amputated and then the surgeon would have to operate. We then fired up a chainsaw and had the patient, girl, scream really loudly as we dumped fake blood on the floor so that the people taking the tour would have blood running down by their feet. Afterwards the doctor said that they would need a donation for the leg they just amputated. Then one of us would reach under the curtain and try to grab people's legs. Had a few people pee themselves when we grabbed them. Lots of crying. I'm a haunted house goer. It was my first haunted house, and a guy grabbed me, and I just automatically threw out a punch. I hit his face and heard a scream and crunch like bone. This will probably get buried, but if you were in a haunted house in Las Vegas and a little short fat girl broke your nose about 10 years ago, I'm so sorry. I felt so bad because you were just doing your job. It was an automatic reaction. Not part of the topic, but I still feel really bad, and I would like to get the word out. I worked at a haunted corn maze once, dressed up as Samara from The Ring. I would crawl out of the well all creepily and scare the bateaus out of people. This cute couple, probably in their 20s, walks past and I start weirdly crawling out of the well, as usual. The guy sees me, screams like a girl, pushes his girlfriend down into the corn and books it. I hold my laughter in as I slowly walk to the girl, who gets up from the corn she was pushed down into, mumbles and sighs as she looks at me and then walks away. Okay, that's not the worst thing really, but that was the funniest thing ever. A group of us, including my now ex-girlfriend, went through the haunted maze, IRC. Well, it ended up being more fun than terrifying as everyone in line was holding onto each other, even strangers, just trying to get to the end without getting scared. My ex-girlfriend was in front of me, and a lady was right behind me. Sure, my group of friends were a bit buzzed, but we didn't care that strangers were holding on to us. Now, my memory is a bit hazy, but all I can remember is a man in a Jason mask with a chainsaw jumped down from a ledge somewhere near a tree and charged right towards me. Maybe it was fear or pure adrenaline, but instinctively, I turned around to run. In the process, I guess I swung my arm and punched the lady behind me in the stomach. I had no idea it happened, but I do remember her kneeling to the ground. I just thought she was terrified, and that was her go-to instinct. Later on, my ex told me that when it happened, I said, "Don't worry about her, just run." For a year after that happened, I never heard the end of it. What if she was pregnant? Or you gave her stomach cancer and all sorts of ridiculous, outlandish comments when you're 19, 20 years old. In the end, I learned that I was a bad person, and we had a good laugh. I don't work at one, but I'm a fan of them. Years ago, me and I went to a place called the Haunted World. Pretty typical haunted corn maze, but known for being the scariest one in town. Anyhow, I'm a pretty small guy, about 5 feet 6 inches, but my roommate was 6 feet 6 inches and 280 plus pounds. He looked like a genuinely scary guy. Large man, arms fully tattooed, and his throat tattooed, not to mention long hair and a full Viking beard. Picture Opie from Sons of Anarchy, but scarier. Anyhow, we pay our way in, walk down the first stretch of the maze, and out jumps the first ghoul. Face first into my roommate's chest. It went something like a "Jesus Christ, you're huge." Roomie just hung his head in defeat. He scared even the professional scarers. The rest of the maze was pretty similar except my falling off a bridge inside a spiraling tube designed to make you dizzy. It worked. And my roommate ended up impressing some of the ladies there too. They saw a bodyguard. It paid well for him. Side note, Roomie is probably one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. Just a bit intimidating at first. Not an employee, but a couple of years ago I was at a haunted house that was very well done. In one of the houses, you go into a bathroom, with flickering lights, the whole nine. In this bathroom was a girl who was impressively in character with phenomenal makeup. Also, she was really hot. She stood out and it impressed me. Fast forward an hour, we're in the lobby between houses, and I see that same girl walking out a door and across the room. I stop her and say, "Hey, I saw you in the bathroom." Really impressive stuff. She shoots me the weirdest look, and hurries away. I thought that was a weird way to handle a compliment. Certainly not how I'd handle it. A few minutes later, I have to drain the lizard. I asked an attendant where the bathroom is. He points to a set of doors across the room. The same doors that girl had walked out of. I told her she did a really impressive job in the bathroom, immediately after she walked out of the bathroom. Not a worker, but last year I took my ex-girlfriend to an indoor one and an actor with a deranged werewolf kind of mask snuck up behind me and tapped me on the shoulder. We made eye contact and his diabolical scheme instantly clicked in my head. Up until that point my girl was clenching my hand with a death grip, and he had taken notice. With the smoothness that I had never had up to that point in my life or hereafter, I slid back just as he slid in my position. She was too preoccupied and frightened to notice that I had let go of her hand for a split second and then took her hand again. It was him. I followed closely behind, and after a halfway or two we came about an elevator which was supposed to simulate a drop. The lights flashed for a second and she realized that I was now across from her. She freaked and screamed even harder when she realized she was holding the hand of some monster. Some friends and strangers thought it was hilarious, as did me. Worked at a corn maze haunted trail place when I was in high school. I did the corn maze, but my friends worked the haunted hayride. One night they were sitting around waiting for the tractor to come by and we all heard a loud crash from the road. This man lost control and hit a tree. Of course, the people in inmate costumes with chainsaws and machetes are the first on scene. The scream he let out was hilarious. I spent nearly a decade working in haunts all over the Omaha area. I have a bunch of stories, but here is my favorite kill. One night I was working as Michael Myers in a touch house. The act was simple. They walked into the room pitch black, keeping to the outside wall. I would sneak behind them and hit a switch activating music and a strobe light. The twist is I carried a real steel blade. If the group needed more motivation I would stab it into the drywall next to them. Well, long nights lead to boredom and I figured out how to throw the blade and make it stick. So, the group came in and everything was going to be planned except for one mouthy girl in front, probably 12 or 14. She starts saying something about how she isn't scared and it's probably not even a real knife. Well, I had enough, cocked my head and flicked the blade about a meter in front of her at eye level. She paused like she couldn't process what had happened, turned her head, saw the knife, and her eyes rolled back at her head as she hit the ground. The rest of the group screamed and trampled her. Needless to say, she woke up in the recovery room and wanted to go home. When I was about 9 or 10, the organization that my mother worked for would do an annual haunted house in an 1800s era train station. We kids got to help out with the entire thing, from the setup to the actual tours. There was this one section which was a long dark hallway. Along the walls of the hallway were small holes, just large enough to fit your hand through. We would wear glow-in-the-dark gloves and stick our hands through the holes from behind the wall to freak people out. Well, one night I was posted behind the wall when a group came through. As usual I put my hands through, the only difference being that someone in the group grabbed my hand in what I hoped was fear and ended up breaking my pinky finger. Never found out who it was. Not necessarily a haunted house, but hilarious, nonetheless. I was homesick with the flu one Halloween and was bored out of my skull, so I decided that I would try and devise a way to scare some people. I worked together with my stepdad to set up a little station in our front yard to wait and prey on innocent trick-or-treaters. It ended up being such a blast that we took turns dressing up. Anyway, at one point when my stepdad was on duty, this poor sap, who may have been a bit drunk, came up to examine the odd statue-looking thing sitting in a chair outside our house. My stepdad waited for the perfect time, sitting there until the guy reached out to touch him, then reached out and grabbed his wrist. The guy freaked out so intensely that he screamed, started running backwards, and then fell flat on his face halfway down our lawn. He slunk away with his friends laughing at him. Just when we thought it couldn't get any better, right before we were about to call it a night, my stepdad told me that this guy went all ninja and snuck behind our hedges and out of his line of view right up to behind his head, then whispered "asshole" right into his ear. Before running away again. Not gnarly, but funny, nonetheless. I volunteered at one of the fire departments set up along with the local costume shop. Half of it was in a house and the other half was outside in a junkyard. Worst I saw was some guy looking behind himself at me and another guy in costume rather than where he was going. He walked right into a big mound of scrap. Luckily he didn't hurt himself because some of that was really sharp. It happened so fast all I could do was shout "Oh dude," right before he careened into a wall of garbage. I got reprimanded a little by my boss for swearing, but he was a nice guy and didn't make a big deal of it. The guy was more embarrassed than anything and didn't make a big deal of anything either. It was pretty funny in retrospect, but at first I thought that guy was going to come out of the pile with a piece of scrap stuck in him. Yeah, it's not that crazy of a story. Big whoop, Want to fight about it? I was going through a haunted house when I was in college with a group of 6 or 7 friends. I was in the front when we entered a room that was set up like a butcher shop with an actor bending over a disemboweled corpse, feasting on it. As I came in, he straightened up, grabbed a meat cleaver, and said, "What are you doing in my meat locker?" Before I could react, he looked at the people behind me and said, "What are you doing in my meat locker?" The train of people didn't stop there, so he asked again, "What are you doing in my meat locker?" I started laughing. He started laughing. Everyone started laughing. We had gone through 3 more rooms, continuing to laugh, ruining any surprises, and making all the actors laugh infectiously before we were done. We turned the haunted house into a funhouse that night.